Chapter 2:15. Caro's sky was always grayish-yellow. Every day, an endless sandstorm would attack the city's sky barrier. Although it wasn't as windproof as the outside world, it was only natural that the sky inside the city would be pitch black whenever the sandstorm started. Every time this happened, the city's magical lights would be lit up. But since Caro had recently been cut off from the mortal plane, resources and supplies were limited, and magical lights were a luxury that consumed a lot of energy. Whenever the sandstorm started, the entire city would be pitch black, so everyone would have to stay indoors and sleep. And this was only a small part of the harsh environment. The lack of color made this world seem rather monotonous. In order to avoid psychological problems, according to past conventions, Caro's resident mages would usually be rotated out every 3 years. But this unexpected situation meant that Cade, who was about to leave his post, would have to stay here for a very long time. And right now, in this world that was mainly black, gray, and yellow, a different color had appeared. It was an endless expanse of white. My temporary guest room had been completely frozen over by ice. Ice crystals spread all the way down the corridor, and when the ice gathered together, there was an empty space where the Ice Knight was currently restraining his chill. Phew, I've finally gotten used to it. The death chill that I've just learned is indeed much more useful than freeze. Now then, let's move on to my next target, the ice sword. Of course, I wouldn't spar with Cade for free. To be honest, I really needed a lot of actual combat to familiarize myself with my new abilities. Although my system had sent my frigid winter earth back into my furnace for maintenance, making most of its power unusable, there were still 2 advanced abilities that had evolved from my original abilities. Just completely mastering these 2 abilities took up a lot of my time and effort. Freeze had only just awakened, but that already proved its potential. Its limitless overlay and unavoidable abilities were the same as Frigid Winter's original form. However, the fact that it could only be added upon contact was still a major flaw. Back then, I had left a note that I would be able to evolve it again once I reached the gold rank. Now, as expected, it had evolved again. Death Chill was a strange ability that dealt ice damage in an area. Not only that, every ice damage would decrease the enemy's resistance to ice. I had tested it before, and if a gold rank mage wasn't on guard, they would probably fall asleep in an ice cube within 30 seconds. This overlay inherited Freeze's unavoidable and limitless overlay effect. Simply speaking, as long as I dragged it out long enough, I was confident that I could freeze even an ice dragon. And since this ability was directly connected to my frigid winter earth, I estimated that even a true god would be unable to resist this seemingly low-damage freezing effect. This was doubtlessly an incredibly powerful ability. It was likely that it would become the core of my future battle strategies. As long as I wore heavy armor, I was already an outstanding Khan Knight. Not to mention, I also had support abilities like Holy Healing, which would make me an obvious advantage in a battle of attrition. My recent fights with other mages doubtlessly proved just how strange and powerful this ability was. When moving, my opponent's feet would suddenly slip or freeze. When chanting an incantation halfway, I would suddenly be interrupted by a cough. My well-prepared defensive barrier would become a useless and fragile block of ice. This was an even more obvious advantage when fighting against an opponent who was also a melee combatant. The closer I got, the more powerful this death chill would be. When 2 swords clashed, the opponent would have to worry about the ice crystals on their sword. Of course, the death chill wouldn't let the sword wielder go. Although I still needed to discover more uses for this ability, just this ability alone was enough for me to deal with any ordinary legend. The most important part was that this ability wouldn't be affected by the environment of this world. If it could be used even in the earth elemental plane, where water and ice elements were scarce, then it was likely that even the gods would be able to use it in their personal domains. That was what I was most concerned about. However, there were some people who didn't like me. Hey, Weren't you the one who said that warriors were all brainless muscleheads? Why did you go into the barbarian job class all by yourself? Alright then, having an old friend who knew everything about you was quite frustrating, especially when he knew your dark history like the back of his hand. However, I really didn't know how to respond to such a ridiculing question. It's a long story. Right? Did the barbarian empire reply? Yep, they barely managed to contact them. Although they could only say a few words, the Truth Symposium responded quite quickly and gave us some good news. Basically, they gave us full authority to deal with any sudden situations. Basically, I have the final say. Cade smiled proudly. From a certain standpoint, this also showed how much the Barbarian Empire and the Truth Symposium trusted and valued him. This was to be expected. I nodded and didn't say anything. However, Cade then chuckled. While we're at it, they also brought something with them. A small gift for you. A gift for me? Back then, I should have left without saying goodbye. Before I left, I reported Amelia and hurriedly ran away. How could there be a gift for me? It's your graduation certificate. Congratulations. After more than 200 years, you're finally the first graduate to have a certificate and be able to find a job. By the way, you've also broken the history of staying the longest in school and playing truant. Alright then, Roland's name was actually written on that little blue booklet, and it even had the Truth Symposium's seal on it. I was both angry and amused at first, but then I came to a sudden realization. You're saying, some things only need to be known in your heart. There's no need to say it out loud. By the way, remember to thank our teacher Aloso. He even helped you become a special lecturer. This seemed like an insignificant joke, but it represented the mage country's acknowledgement of me. At the very least, I would no longer be an outsider to the mage country. Now that I had the status of a special lecturer who graduated from the mage country, I also had the status of a member of the mage country. It would only be natural for me to command these juniors of mine. Teacher Aloso? That nice guy from the ice element? Yep, I got it. In return, I'll give him a copy of the principles behind Ice Aeon. Yonya, so it really was you. Forget it, everyone has their own troubles, so I won't mention it. Then, I'll thank you on behalf of Teacher Aloso. After all, this is the only ice element forbidden spell in the past 300 years. Although 99% of people won't be able to learn it, it's still good to enrich our library. After the mage country sent out the news, all of Cairo became busy preparing for war. The conflict between the mage country and the Bardi Empire involved every mage's thought. Everyone's goal was to quickly resolve the current problem and return to the mage country. Since Cairo began taking action, the Shadow Tower, Hand of Tiso, and other factions that were on good terms with the mage country also accepted the invitation to join the mage country in preparing for war. As for me, I patiently waited for this fated battle. Omdoroken, the blood feud with Red Maple City, is still fresh in our minds. It's time to settle the score. From a certain standpoint, the elemental god of an elemental plane was also the master of this plane. Countless elemental creatures would be under his control. Only extremely powerful elemental creatures would be able to refuse his summons. That was why this was going to be an incredibly dangerous battle from the very start. That was why we needed to prepare a sufficient amount of cannon fodder in order to deal with the elemental god's nearly limitless number of cannon fodder elemental warriors. Every member of our small team had been working hard since the very beginning. Ordinary wind and water elemental creatures were probably nothing more than trash here. That was why Camdron had been doing his best to trick the mage country's residents into becoming cannon fodder. The ambitious ancient existences had long since been dissatisfied with Omdoroken, especially since he had been sealed away for such a long time and hadn't shown himself after returning. Now there were even rumors that he was seriously injured and on the verge of death. Naturally, Omdoroken wasn't much of a threat. The new generation of Earth Elemental Lords were quite ambitious, and had long since wanted to replace Omdoroken. The older generation of Earth Elemental Lords didn't dare to underestimate Omdoroken at all. However, the more they learned about how powerful Omdoroken was, the more they didn't want to miss out on this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity when they learned that Omdoroken was seriously injured. Later on, Camdron no longer needed to act as a lobbyist. The Earth Elemental Lords and Earth Elemental Lords formed their own factions, and their numbers had reached the limit. The Earth Elemental God, who normally didn't do much good, was now facing the threat of being impeached by his citizens due to his absence for several thousand years. On the other hand, Renée was also working hard in her own way. The endless demon army was gathering more and more, becoming a major threat to the mortal plane. If it wasn't for the fact that the Earth Elemental Lords wanted to take care of Omdoroken first, the allied army would likely immediately turn around and attack this demon lord who was acting so recklessly. As for the two semi-god mages in my small team, they didn't relax at all. They didn't even know that there was an endless supply of cannon fodder. They simply carried out their own duties. The countless rune giants and earth-type magical plants had already accumulated into a mountain. Plus, the allied army of outsiders had already arrived. It was likely that Omdoroken was going to be in big trouble this time. Meanwhile, Omdoroken's side was completely silent. Although it was possible to sense that the mountains and rocks were trembling slightly, as if some terrifying existence was breathing and growing stronger, apart from that, there were no other signs of movement. No Earth Elemental Lords were summoned. In fact, Omdoroken himself wasn't moving at all, as if he was still in a deep sleep. Oh my, Roland really knows how to order people around. He actually made us act as scouts. Still, it's doubtlessly a good thing to be able to see such a situation. It would seem that our chances of victory have increased. Before I even finished speaking, Marguerite and Adam disappeared without a trace. It was no wonder that they were sent to act as scouts. Adam was the strongest shield in the world, and Marguerite had teleportation and defensive abilities. Even if they faced Omdoroken, they would still be able to escape unscathed. Omdoroken being unprepared was completely within expectations. For an elemental god, just the destruction of his physical body would be enough to send him into a long hibernation. And in order to vent his anger, he used his divine soul to cast two forbidden spells. The first spell destroyed Red Maple City's city walls, while the second spell provided the plains beastmen with terrain to attack. His actions had indeed changed the entire battle situation. However, he didn't even have a physical body at that time, which meant that he had self-destructed his divine soul, paying a tremendous price. It was likely that he wouldn't be able to recover without several hundred or even several thousand years of hibernation. In his eyes, this single attack should have been enough to secure victory. However, he never expected that the beastmen would still be defeated in the end. And when his weakened divine soul returned to the Earth Elemental Plane, he didn't even dare to appear in front of the other Elemental Lords. He directly returned to his home to hibernate. Without a doubt, this was the correct choice. Perhaps as long as he hibernated for a period of time, he would be able to use the Earth Elemental Plane's endless supply of energy to him, and he would be able to once again have the ability to protect himself. This was obviously better than appearing in a weakened state and letting those ambitious Earth Elemental Lords discover his weakness. The only thing that he hadn't miscalculated was that his Earth Elemental Lords viewed him with far too much importance. They were willing to abandon what they were doing in order to eliminate any future threats at all costs. In the end, because he had hibernated, he had lost the initiative. There was only half a month left until the 2-month deadline. This faintly discernible anti-Islamic Omdoroken army had already gathered nearly half of the Earth Elemental Plane's combat strength. Not only would they have an endless supply of cannon fodder, they would also have no lack of high-level combat strength. As I said, with so many people, what's the point of talking about tactics? Just A+1 will be enough. However, this was more to encourage the army's morale than anything else. After all, even if we had the combat strength of a small half of the Earth elemental plane, Omdoroken would have the combat strength of an entire Earth elemental plane. As the ruler of this elemental plane, the elemental god could use the elemental power of this plane as he pleased. It was as if the entire plane was his divine domain. In his own territory, he wouldn't be any weaker than a mid-level true god. He was definitely much stronger than Felix had been in the past. If it wasn't for the fact that Omdoroken had been so heavily injured in the mortal plane, those experienced elemental lords wouldn't have had the courage to rebel against Omdoroken at all. And if they missed out on this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, it would be highly unlikely that there would be another. However, no one would know just how powerful an elemental god would be in their home turf unless they actually fought. After all, the earliest elemental gods would be replaced was 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. It would be very difficult to find recent battle records. Ask the water elemental god and the wind elemental god? It was a good idea, but it wasn't very realistic. In fact, he had already asked before they parted ways, but the other party had remained strangely silent. It was obvious that the other party had no intention of revealing his trump card. Today is the Earth Elemental God's turn. Are you worried that it'll be your turn tomorrow? He's quite careful. We were enemies to begin with, and now we were in a temporary alliance against a common enemy. I wasn't confident that we wouldn't turn on each other tomorrow. It was quite reasonable for him to be so cautious. I was also hiding most of my abilities, so it was only natural that I wouldn't be able to say anything about it. Actually, due to our different elemental elements, our fighting styles are completely different. It's impossible to provide any valuable information to begin with, not to mention that Omdoroken's power level and history are far above ours, so it's even more impossible to use him as a reference. In that case, rather than providing false information that will cause miscalculations, it's better to not say anything at all. This excuse sounded very reasonable, but if I believed it, I would really be a fool. However, as a reason for both sides to take a step back, it was not a bad idea. As the countdown to February drew closer and closer, I finally received some good news. Heloise has woken up? That's wonderful. Why did I always seem to forget someone? No, definitely not. You insist that you do? Fine then, you asked for it. Let's see what that existence, whose name had become a forbidden word, has been busy with recently. In a distant sand source, a draken wearing only a tattered piece of cloth was currently sitting cross-legged and smiling. All sorts of creatures were gathered around him, including stone giants, sandworms, golden sphinxes, and so on. All sorts of creatures that had been enemies with each other were now sitting together. Of course, the only person capable of such a miraculous feat was the draken currently teaching. All appearances are nothing more than hypocrisy. Appearance is emptiness, emptiness is appearance. Life is created by oneself, and appearances are born from the heart. Everything in the world is an illusion. All of you hate each other and kill each other just because of some minor differences. You've already become obsessed with appearances. All are equal, and true love knows no boundaries. Perhaps you're of different species and genders, but as long as you have a heart that pursues true love, you're all brothers and sisters at the root. There's nothing different about you. The legend-ranked Draken was currently teaching his path of true love to the residents of another dimension. After his words, brainwashing, more and more elemental creatures began following him, searching for a path of coexistence that didn't belong to this dimension. I feel that all bodies are suffering, so I hereby swear that I'm willing to go to the ends of the earth and promote the path of true love. I'm willing for all living creatures in the world to abandon their prejudices and ignore race, gender, and appearance to pursue true love. I'm willing to be struck by 9 bolts of lightning to test my willpower, to prove my sincerity. Boom. The Draken had just said that he was willing to be struck by lightning to test his willpower when the lightning bolt descended. However, it was unknown if the Draken was testing him or simply disliked him and wanted to strike him to death with lightning. This sudden violent lightning bolt caused his disciples to exclaim in surprise. It was quite rare to encounter lightning in the earth elemental plane, and this overflowing lightning element was doubtlessly the best evidence that this was true lightning. The other creatures still intended to save Beifong, but suddenly Beifong's charred skin fell off, revealing new skin underneath. Beifong had been struck by lightning, yet he was still completely unharmed. Instead, he revealed his signature smile. As everyone can see with your own eyes, our sincerity has moved the heavens, sending down lightning to test us. Beifong had just shouted out righteously. The dark clouds that continued to surround him doubtlessly meant that this 9 bolts of lightning were only the beginning. His lightning tribulation hadn't ended yet. His disciples first had expressions of fear as they tried to hide. However, they calmed down when they saw Beifong smiling as if he didn't care at all. The surrounding creatures all had pious expressions as they bowed to him in a low voice. However, only Beifong himself knew that it wasn't that he didn't want to run, it was that he couldn't run. I've been sitting for too long. My feet are numb. After being struck by lightning just now, they're all numb to the point where I can't move. The smile on my face has also frozen. Can I take back what I just said? Asterisk boom. Asterisk alright then, the heavens used their own method to answer him. The residents of the plains enjoyed this super lightning storm that was rarely seen in 1,000 years. It was said that thousands of bolts of lightning tore through the sky that day, breaking the highest record in the history of the earth elemental plane. The most speechless part was that this miracle became one of the miracles of this abnormal religion. From then on, this abnormal religion and philosophy began to take root. Chapter 216. As expected of the mage country. It's even more ridiculous than before. This was a sea of books. Countless ancient books filled countless bookshelves, and every single one of them was a priceless magical book. The secrets and knowledge sealed within were enough to make anyone go crazy. After obtaining the status of a lecturer in the mage country, I also obtained the right to enter this library. In this world, books were the most precious wealth. Reading books was also a luxurious enjoyment. Back in the day, we had spent a lot of effort just to obtain a library reading permit from the Tassel Kingdom. However, the mage country was much more generous in this aspect. Even with Cade's recommendation, I was able to read these precious ancient books. This also proved that the mage country's foundational goal was to record and spread all magical knowledge. They needed all the mysteries and truths in the world. The title of Truth Overseer, which represented the highest authority in the mage country, explained everything. A mage's goal would forever be to obtain more knowledge and truth. The highest rank only meant that they occupied a higher position in the endless sea of knowledge. Of course, this was only the ideal mage. In reality, there were plenty of mages who were tempted by all sorts of things. After all, it was far too easy to use power that they had already obtained in exchange for authority and money in the mortal world. Some mages had even come for authority from the very start. They would naturally leave once they reached a certain level of cultivation. But right now, I didn't have the time to sigh about this. I was already spending most of my time studying these magical books. However, there were far more books than I had expected, and many of them were covered in a thick layer of dust. It would seem that no one had opened them for a very long time. It was evident that these books lacked proper management, and it was quite difficult to find them. It was likely that I wouldn't be able to successfully finish them. At this moment, the uninvited guests further slowed down my work. What a pity! Aston, Fimir, and Ibot could have been even more powerful. When old classmates met, it was inevitable that they would talk about their former classmates' whereabouts. However, they would always end with such a sentence, lamenting the death of an old classmate. It was inevitable that they would sigh and feel pity. 4 high-level mages, extending their lifespan wasn't a problem. It was possible to transform into an artificial life form, a half-elemental creature, a god envoy, and so on. Even if they were unlucky, transforming into an undead like a lich was also an option. Of course, the prerequisite was that one had to be strong enough. Those who were destined to be unable to reach the undying level weren't even considered in the first place. What made me sigh and feel pity was that those existences that should have reached the undying realm always died due to mysterious reasons. Some time ago, there was an investigative academic magazine that did a survey and statistics on the causes of death of high-level mages. It was shocking. Among them, the leading cause of death was death in battle, accounting for at least 71%. The second leading cause was death from natural causes such as old age and illness, accounting for only 11%. The third leading cause was accidental, experimental death. Most of the talented mages were dragged into conflicts due to interests, wars, or personal grudges. In the end, they lost their lives, and their dreams and pursuits turned into bubbles. Cade felt some regret, as well as rejoiced for the geniuses who had perished. Cade's talent was clearly below average among his peers, but because he didn't like competition, he always shut himself away to research his own research. Yet, he had unknowingly reached the peak. The geniuses who fought would end up with nothing, while the mediocre who didn't fight would know their own limits and live their own lives. But as time passed, they would end up with everything. From a certain standpoint, this was doubtlessly a wonderful irony. For the great majority of mages who gave up on the path to power, what stopped them from climbing to the peak wasn't their own weaknesses, but rather the temptations and troubles of the outside world. By the way, are you really not mocking me? Why did I feel like the meaning behind his words was becoming more and more familiar? I seemed to have died several times already, and I was constantly involved in the mortal world for certain reasons. But Cade laughed when he heard this. What kind of genius are you? Apart from getting full marks in an elective class like Mage Self-Defense, you're a genius that's hovering around the passing mark in everything else? You even had to retake a foundational class like Elemental Concepts 4 times. If it wasn't for the fact that you hooked up with a few female teachers back then, you probably would have been expelled long ago. Hearing this, I was immediately annoyed. As expected, childhood friends in real life weren't cute at all, especially those of the same gender who knew their dark histories. They should all be tied to goblin rockets and sent to the moon. I was actually quite happy to have you back then. At the very least, our class's average scores were much lower, and I didn't have to worry about getting last. All right then, the second-to-last and first-to-last students were sighing about how time passed and how heartless fate was. Those geniuses had already died, which made the irony even stronger. Don't say that. You're making it sound like I'm living off a woman. Hey, why are you looking at me with such a shocked expression? Be careful that I don't turn on you. You actually don't have any self-awareness? Roland, who only has his face, and Holy Knight, who chose the wrong path, were quite famous back in the day. You have no idea how many people bought your portrait and made you into a scarecrow after you hooked up with Teacher Heloise and then Teacher Amelia. You seem to know quite a bit. I clenched my fists. This was a clear warning, but Cade still didn't seem to notice at all. Of course, back then, this was my main source of living expenses. There were quite a few tricks involved. Just drawing a likeness wasn't enough. Not only did it have to be similar, it also had to make people angry. I had to draw a sinister smile on the pretty boy's face. Only then would the customers be satisfied. Especially after the news of you abandoning Amelia spread, my business was explosively good. On the very same day, I received a month's worth of orders and earned enough money for a year's worth of tuition fees. So, even if you blackmail me for a few gold coins, it wouldn't be a problem at all. Looking at this old man in front of me who usually acted serious, but would talk endlessly the moment he started a topic, I couldn't restrain myself anymore and viciously punched him. Asterisk clang. Asterisk this time, it was my hand that hurt. Cade's skin actually shone with a metallic luster. Stone skin? No iron skin? Even though I didn't sense any magical waves, his skin had already transformed into a steel-like hard skin. I had never seen such a magic before. This is a magic I created myself. However, the idea was based on the legendary story, The Great Forest Nunnery and the 18 Diamond Old Women, that you told me in the past. I also used the name Golden Bell from that story. It's able to turn my bones into metal, making me as indestructible as the invincible old women and the Wolverine old women in that story. Amazing, right? Alright then, I didn't even know where to start commenting on the magical spell, Golden Bell. Should I start with the Wolverine old women, the nunnery, or even the Wolverine old women? But now, I finally understood that although the current Cade was still a playboy, he was at least a true archmage. Just like how water magic was separated from ice magic, earth magic's closest relative was doubtlessly metal magic, which was famous for its outstanding defensive abilities. But unlike ice magic, which could only focus on the main topic, the metal element was inextricably linked to the earth element. If one didn't cultivate earth magic to a certain degree, they wouldn't even have the right to learn metal magic. Being able to maintain the metal element in its original state was definitely a unique skill. This doubtlessly allowed me to understand Cade's current power level, but it also gave me a new idea. Cade, come over and help me out. You should be quite familiar with earth magic, right? Since Cairo City was dominated by earth element mages, the records here naturally focused on earth magic, earth element creatures, and magic equipment. Of course, I wouldn't be here to study earth magic. Although there was no harm in studying more, with my current talent in magic, it would take me at least several dozen years to learn a new type of elemental magic from scratch. I didn't have that kind of free time. Omdorokan is at the peak of the earth element, and earth magic is inextricably linked to him. I don't believe that he only has the power of the mortal plane. What history does he have? What weaknesses does he have? What elemental magic he's skilled in? And what hidden aces he has? We absolutely must find out before the battle begins. Hearing this, Cade revealed a smile that seemed to say, I knew you would have this trick up your sleeve. If someone else starts a fight, you might seem like you don't care at all, but in reality, you'll spend the entire night investigating the other party's 18 generations of ancestors. You're still exactly the same as before. Cade clapped his hands as he continued to spout about his dark history that made people want to beat him up. Asterisk clap clap clap. Asterisk all the magical lamps in the hall were lit up, and all the doors were opened wide. Large numbers of young mages poured in and began busying themselves. The Archmage had already sent a message to everyone, giving them the task of searching. Between the bookshelves, there were already people busying themselves. Group A, start with history and see if there's any record of Omdorokan fighting. Group B would like to investigate the Earth Elemental Lords and Elemental Gods. Their abilities should be useful as a reference. Group C, start with high-level Earth Elemental Magic. Perhaps there's an ability similar to Omdorokan's. The most important thing is the forbidden spells that humans can't use. Right, there's also the forbidden spells of the Kingdom of the Elves. The students began to actively search, and Cade spoke in a rare serious tone. At this time, let's not face him alone like we did in the past. Besides, this is our battle, so let's trust our companions a little more. This was the most serious expression Cade had had on his face since we met. I felt inexplicably moved as I casually took out a book and began reading. What's this? Underneath the cover of the hardcover book, which had the words Steel Elemental Construction Model, was actually a book of drawings, all of which were pictures of naked young girls. The Archmage who silently took the book and hid it under his robe explained everything. Using books that no one has borrowed in the library for several years as a cover, and hiding your own personal techniques inside, this hasn't changed at all. As far as the eye could see, many students were surreptitiously heading for certain bookshelves. It seemed that there were quite a few who were doing this. Ah, how strange, I actually found AH. Before that newbie could even shout, someone else covered his mouth and dragged him away. Some things were already common knowledge, but there were still teachers here, so it wouldn't be a good thing if it spread. As for the treasure he found, it instantly disappeared without a trace. It seemed that someone had already taken it for themselves. Judging from the students' actions and scale, in this city where there were obviously more women than men, some industries were still underdeveloped, but some industries were obviously profitable. For example, the Goblin Publishing Company's emblem on the drawing book doubtlessly explained the source of these books. The students' teleportation was organized by the Mage Country's officials, so there were restrictions on how much luggage they could bring. The Goblins' dimensional tearing devices were much more flexible. Even if only 1 out of 10 books could be teleported over, as long as that one book sold for the price of 10 copies, they naturally wouldn't make a loss. And with my understanding of the goblins, they would most likely ask for a price of 1,000 books. Heh, you really are the same as before. What, you're still collecting such books? This time, it was my turn to tease this old bastard. The goblins gave it to me, the goblins gave it to me. I don't know what they wanted with me, so I just left it here. It was quite rare for this old bastard to even blush. But if what he said was true, then I would probably have to re-evaluate the goblins' abilities. At the very least, their ability to bribe was ridiculous. At least let the goblins bleed before we leave. They've earned too much recently, so it's about time for them to bleed something. All right then, let's ignore that mysterious voice in the corner of the room. You won't laugh at me, will you? I won't, I can completely understand. How can you understand? You're so popular back then, and you're so young now. Just how many girlfriends do you have now? How many beautiful women have you been intimate with? Don't tell me that you're a winner in life. I moved my lips, but didn't say my final answer. Actually, I'm the same as you. I've also been single for more than 300 years. Intimate contact with beautiful women. Does having my body cut open and my heart dug out count? You can't be too unbroken. When the innumerable forces of the crusade gathered together, my casual words spread everywhere. In a way, I wasn't wrong in saying that. When all the opposing forces gathered together, even their own side was astonished at how strong the opposing forces were. Another problem was that the command system was in chaos. Different weapons, equipment, and supplies were all different. Many organizations even had grudges against each other, which was impossible to sort out. It's impossible to command everyone? It doesn't matter. All we have to do is attack them all. You don't understand? Fine then, everyone can fight for themselves and do whatever they want. This was already a temporary team, and the leaders of all the opposing forces were basically unwilling to submit to their comrade. Asking for some sort of command wouldn't end well. On the contrary, if everyone fought for themselves and only cared about themselves, it would be easier for them to obtain excellent results. And right now I was busy punching a certain person's head with my fist. Renee, you really are daring. Chapter 217. Wherever the endless demon army passed by, the ground would be scorched, and the air would be filled with the smell of sulfur. Ruins and wreckage would become the main theme of the world. If there was one type of racial discrimination that was considered correct and natural in the mortal plane, then it would probably be prejudice against demons and devils. As the incarnations of chaos, demons would indeed never do anything good. They would find joy in the destruction of other lives. Death and screams would be their marching song. Souls would be their food and supplies. In fact, even the undead, existences that brought death, were created by ancient demons. Not to mention, every holy war had always treated them as the antagonists. Calling them the source of all evil would be a bit unfair, but it would be appropriate to call them the ultimate antagonists. And right in front of me was an endless demon army. The camp they occupied was filled with the smell of distortion. The earth was angry yet helpless, and the dimensional laws of the mortal plane were being rewritten. Look, this is my army. Amazing, isn't it? I couldn't help but get angry at this silly girl who was so proud of herself. She was obviously just pretending to be stupid. The only thing worth celebrating was that her body didn't seem distorted due to chaos corrosion. In that case, either she was perfectly capable of hiding her own mutations and distortions, or she had completely mastered chaos and hadn't mutated her physical body or soul at all. Considering the other end of the bloodline chain, the latter was more likely. But even so, I was still quite angry. Damn it, you really dared to do it. You know what the end result is for anyone who interacts with demons and devils. I even know a dozen who've had their physical bodies and souls devoured by demons. That's more than enough for me to write a complete guide to being deceived, and you still dared to. Renee didn't reply. She simply maintained her smile as she looked at me. She was acting like a dead pig that wasn't afraid of boiling water. At this moment, I realized that not only did she know the consequences, she also intended to bear the consequences. Forget it, I don't care anymore. Do whatever you want. In the end, I could only angrily toss out this sentence, just like a parent who had been angered by a naughty child. This sounded quite serious, but it was actually a type of helplessness that I couldn't say anything about. There's not much time left. I don't want to stand behind and watch anymore. Her last sentence caused my heart to tremble. It seemed that I had only arranged the path that I thought was the best for my juniors, but I had never cared about their own feelings. The orthodox path was indeed the best, but it also meant that it would be difficult and slow to progress. It was likely that it would be impossible for them to become the top-level combat strength that would affect the overall situation before the Holy War ended. In the end, they might end up just like me back then. Despite being the leader of a country's prince and bearing the trust of the citizens, in the face of an irresistible enemy, I could only watch helplessly as the knights and citizens were sacrificed, unable to do anything about it. In Rain's perspective, that was the most likely fate to occur. In order to control her own fate, she made a choice to absolutely pursue power. In fact, judging from her calm smile, she had already mentally prepared herself to accept the consequences, including the mental preparation to have a falling out with me because of this. As a princess, as well as the heir to the Donlon royalty, I can't hand over the fate of my country to someone else. Even if my country's destruction is already fated, I will at the very least give everything I have to change this damned fate. Beneath this seemingly silly smile was the same persistence as her ancestors. Perhaps, from the very start, I had underestimated this lass. You'd better reflect on your actions. All right then. I didn't know what else to say. I tossed down this seemingly valiant but actually meaningless threat as I turned around and left. Perhaps it would be more accurate to say that I was fleeing. After I calmed down, I hesitated for a moment before finally speaking in a low voice. Eliza, you know more about demons than I do. However, my usual instantaneous response didn't come. It seemed that the dimensional barrier had also caused my silver ring to lose its ability to contact me. I had also lost the chance to learn more about demons. It would seem that I need to have a good discussion with Cavendish. Perhaps some things couldn't be avoided anymore. Congratulations to host for increasing your reputation level yet again. You are now respected, infamous. Please keep up the good work. A sudden system notification interrupted my thoughts. Although this doubtlessly meant that I was now one step closer to my myth-ranked quest, I glanced at my system again. That huge debt of 67%, 33423, was something I couldn't bear to look at directly. I owe even more now. Respect for the infamy in parentheses after that? Actually, it was quite easy to understand. Normally, my system would increase my reputation level by neutral, cold talk, friendly, respected, venerated, and worship. But ever since I had used some underhanded methods in order to quickly increase my reputation level, Although my reputation level had increased much faster, there was an additional, infamous, after friendly, and an additional, infamous, after respected, which made me feel rather helpless. Underhanded methods? It was like this: look, it's that Roland, the bastard who toyed with the angel Amelia's feelings. I heard that he was a super scumbag back in the day. Stop pointing. Be careful not to get pregnant. I heard that he's a great pervert who can make a woman pregnant just by looking at her. He's already several hundred years old, and he's still dressed so young. His intentions are unfathomable. I heard that he recently tricked more than 10 young girls. I heard that back in the day, he dated 2 idol-level beautiful teachers at the same time. He even had a foot in the other 2 girls' boat. Later, he was exposed and someone wanted to kill him. He didn't even have time to collect his graduation certificate and directly escaped. As I walked, I heard all sorts of rumors that would make me go crazy. Yet, I couldn't do anything about it. This was just like hell. The reason? These rumors were all my own doing. From a certain standpoint, this was the result that I wanted. I can't continue like this. My reputation level has been stuck at 212/20,000 for a long time now. It seems that I won't be able to increase my reputation in the near future. In the midst of a major battle, my ace card had to be mortgaged due to a lack of money. I was probably the only one who had such a trump card. If I couldn't redeem it at a critical moment and even lost the battle because of this, that would be far too embarrassing. Yet, my system's abnormal reputation quest just so happened to require me to at least reach venerated in order to proceed to the next step. Even if I did all sorts of good deeds, I was still stuck at just above friendly. I was far from reaching the next step of respect, not to mention the unimaginably high venerated. This wasn't the first time that the reputation system had appeared. Previously, the Roland Sacred Sword had a special effect that would greatly increase the user's reputation with the people of the Mist. I had previously done some research on that abnormal reputation system and discovered that the system wasn't omnipotent. This so-called reputation, in the end, still depended on how many people knew about you and how deep of an impression you had. As for how many people counted for 1 point, that was impossible to calculate. If the Roland Sacred Sword's reputation bonus became a reality, it would be nothing more than every person of the people of the Mist having high expectations of the sword wielder. They would proactively spread the sword wielder's identity and learn about his deeds. This would naturally increase the user's reputation. As long as you know the rules, it's possible to cheat, and so, after thinking about it for a long time, I finally came up with a devious method when I recalled how celebrities in my previous life were always hyped up and gossiped about others. Good deeds don't leave the house, while evil deeds travel thousands of miles. Reputation needs to be known. As for good deeds and excellent people, it's fine to say something like other people's children, since it won't reach another street. But if there's any bad deeds or gossiped about others, even if they don't actively spread it, it'll still travel thousands of miles in a single night. Intelligent life forms are naturally highly sensitive to negative gossip, and they're even more sensitive to gossiping about famous people. Isn't it because of my face? I didn't want it for the past 300 years. Alright then, that was the truth. All I had to do was toss out 2 slightly dirty jokes, and then arrange for a student to ask me about it in a public place. I only smiled and shook my head without forcefully denying it. And so, the negative gossip was successfully created. Originally, the jokes only mentioned my past unsuccessful relationship with Amelia. But looking at the rumors, it was obvious that once the gossip started spreading, it would go out of control. Making a woman pregnant with just a look? Are you even mages? That's so unmagical. No, just think about it. He's Archmage Cade Sr., so he's definitely an amazing Archmage. It's said that he successfully fused a fragment of his own soul into his magical will. All he needs to do is stare at you, and you'll be able to cast a mental spell that attacks your will. and that terrifyingly strong soul fragment will directly use your physical body to form a baby. That's the principle behind getting pregnant with a look. If that's the case, doesn't that mean even men? I just met him yesterday, and I even smiled at him, and he glanced at me. Don't tell me I'm also. Junior, I suggest that you go to the infirmary and get yourself checked out. There's already several hundred numbers in the infirmary. Your senior here has a number for the first 100 that I'll sell to you for cheap. To be honest, it was far too inconceivable for the rumors to develop to such an extent. Get pregnant with a look? Mental magic? Get pregnant with a man? You actually believe such unmagical rumors? Do you even have the right to call yourselves mages? Also, I'll remember you, the one who's trying to get rich in the chaos. Brat, don't let me find a chance. If I really do, haha, just wait for me to make things difficult for you. The most frustrating part was that I was the one who created this situation, and I couldn't even defend myself. In order to spread this rumor even more, I even had to add fuel to the fire, such as flirting with a few beauties. Cough, I definitely didn't do this out of selfishness, definitely not. I did indeed ask for it, but I was the only one who was unlucky, so how could I? Look, it's that young girl abductor, the white-robed pervert Cade. It's said that he's already committed countless crimes, and he's only suppressing them with his authority. How could that be possible? Teacher Cade is so well respected. It's just a rumor. No, he's good friends with that pervert king. It's said that they often exchange criminal experiences together. Last time, a student even asked that Roland, and that guy actually didn't deny it. And so, Cade's century-old reputation was destroyed in a single day. He was already a bit indiscreet to begin with, and now that these clues matched up, old Cade's reputation instantly became incredibly strange. It's not nice to scam your bro? This was returning the favor. Did you really think that I didn't know who was the one who added fuel to the fire? You even used mental magic to distort the truth. Alright then, let's not talk about old Cade, who was currently doing his best to redeem his reputation, only to be met with screams, and slaps from women. Although destroying his own reputation was indeed a devious move, and he suffered great losses, the benefits were also quite obvious. I reached respected in just 2 days. My reputation has risen to such a terrifying level. I'm afraid that all the factions in this dimension now know about me. It was obviously a good thing that I had a myth-ranked quest, but I still had tears in my eyes. The reason? Last night, I only ate a bowl of noodles at a noodle shop, and even a 70-year-old old lady was so scared that she abandoned the shop and ran away. I only nodded at a young student on the side of the road, and that student actually screamed in agony and then pretended to be dead on the ground. Did I dare to believe it? That guy was even a muscular middle-aged man. I was quite embarrassed. Thanks to them, my reputation is becoming stranger and stranger. It doesn't matter anymore. What's a reputation? Can it be eaten? It doesn't matter if I have a good reputation or a bad reputation. What's the difference? Alright then, if it really didn't matter at all, then what were the tears in my eyes? Although the negative news increased my reputation at an astonishing rate, there was a bottleneck. Due to the limited number of people in Cairo City, it seemed that my reputation would stop increasing after I reached respected, infamous, which was quite vexing for me. It would seem that I still need a big piece of news. Right, Amelia and the others are coming here in 2 days. Perhaps that's it. I hope that I don't get beaten to death by Eliza when I get back. As a veteran teacher of the Cloud Tower, this wasn't Amelia's first time coming to Cairo City. In fact, she had even been stationed here for 3 years and made countless hidden arrangements. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to successfully prepare her garden so easily this time. In order to swindle research funds, as well as in order to prevent her own private research from being exposed, Amelia put on a good front. Her reputation had always been good. Apart from the ancient artifacts of her generation who knew her true identity, Most mages treated her as a trustworthy senior. Due to her gentle personality, ladylike appearance, fake, and even the legendary royal bloodline, real, she treated everyone equally, treating them like experimental subjects, which made her even more popular. In order to maintain her good image, she hid all her random things outside before entering Cairo City. She even changed her clothes, took a bath, and even spent quite a bit of time in front of a mirror. Only when she was able to conceal her insanity and the perfect angel Amelia reappeared did she raise her parasol and casually enter the city. But the moment she entered the city, she noticed that something was off. Everyone was looking at her with strange expressions. In the past, there was respect, adoration, love, and even infatuation. But now, there was pity in their eyes, as if she had suffered some kind of tragedy. Work hard. Persevere. Everyone will love and respect you as always. Let bygones be bygones. We, the Angel Support Club, will forever support you. The indistinct cheering sound behind him was even more puzzling. But soon, she understood. After turning a corner, I arrived at Cairo's most prosperous cross street, which was also the only way to reach the center of the city. The crowds of the past were nowhere to be seen. The streets here were now filled with extravagant flowers, and there were even flags and balloons on both sides of the street. And in the middle of the garden, there was a familiar figure wearing a white formal attire, half kneeling there. My dear Amelia, please forgive me for hurting you in the past. My dear Amelia, let's get back together. Amelia was stunned for a moment before she squeezed out these words through gritted teeth. Bastard Roland. Chapter 218. Wang Feng. Roland finally got what he wanted. He's on the headlines. When I abandoned all unnecessary concerns and pride, the things I did were so shameless that even I was afraid of myself. I had gone to great lengths to obtain the flowers from a plant mage, and I stole someone else's groom's gown. I even spent a large amount of money to buy the balloons from the gnomes. If it wasn't for the fact that it was still daytime, I would have even prepared gnome fireworks. In order to grab the headlines, I was going all out. It seemed that my luck was quite good. At the very least, it was much better than a certain person who failed to steal the headlines. I didn't encounter any even more eye-catching news. When the news of kneeling at the crossroads begging for a reconciliation spread, especially since one of the parties involved was the famous female archmage Amelia, the former truth overseer who was beautiful, intelligent, and powerful, this super gossip swept through the entire city that very day. It was likely that no matter where one was, this matter would be discussed. Did you hear? That guy actually bought all the flowers and spent at least several tens of thousands of gold coins just for that one moment. I was both delighted and terrified as I watched my reputation skyrocket. I prayed that this matter wouldn't spread back to the mortal plane, especially not to a certain person. But what terrified me the most was Amelia's reaction. If she had attacked me back then, I had predicted that she would have such a reaction, which would have been much easier to deal with. As long as she attacked me, this matter would be over, and the headlines would be set. Reconciliation failed would also be a huge piece of news, which would further solidify my identity as a scumbag. By the way, it wasn't easy for me to think of ways to make myself a scumbag. However, Amelia's reaction was completely out of my expectations. She didn't get angry, nor did she attack me on the spot. She just clenched her teeth and squeezed out a few words from between her teeth. Roland, you bastard. However, her voice was very low. Coupled with the mysterious blush on her face and the red glow on her cheeks, it was inevitable that people would think too much. I could understand that she was trying to protect her image and forcefully suppress her anger so that she wouldn't reveal her true self. But what did you say when you accepted the flowers with a red face? Did that mean you agreed to reconcile? But the problem was that it was just a rumor from the very start. How could you possibly reconcile without even starting a relationship? Congratulations, you actually managed to get ahead of me, and your even teacher Amelia. You're such a happy person, aren't you? Sigh, in this world, you are probably the only one who can subdue her. Treat her well in the future and don't mess around anymore. Otherwise, many people will find trouble with you. Cade, did this bro's wedding blessings come too soon? Don't stroke your beard and give me blessings from an otherworldly master. I'm not ready yet. Alright, since I didn't think things through, I'm afraid I'm in big trouble. Whenever we met, the usually calm Amelia would blush and not know what to do with her face. Her blush would extend all the way to her ears. A fierce tiger would suddenly transform into a cute tiger, and a crazy witch would suddenly transform into a young girl in love. This strange feeling of incongruity made me want to bang my head against a wall. Pa pa pa. Alright then, I had already hit my head against the wall, and my head was covered in blood, but the matter still hadn't been resolved. Over the past few days, even Renee looked at me as if she was looking at scum. What was even stranger was that after I reached venerated, I didn't receive the usual infamous or something like that. Instead, it was venerated. The prodigal son returns 20,000/20,000. System notification. The prodigal son's return is more valuable than gold. You must treat him well in the future. Mommy is so happy. I wish you all the best. Hurry up and give birth to a super troublemaking and lively baby just like you. Alright then, I truly didn't know how to face this. If it was possible, I really wanted to die together with my system. However, there was another slightly more serious system notification that made me heave a sigh of relief. System notification. Your reputation with the mage country of Arledent has reached venerated. The first stage of the epic quest, Battle of the Two Dragons, has been completed. By default, you have chosen the Arledent faction. You will be rewarded with 50,000 fate points. For the next stage of the quest, please go to the capital of Arledent and look for the Truth Overseer, Oslowan. If you don't trigger the quest within 1 year, the first stage's rewards will be deducted twice as much. 88%, 10243. Perhaps the large amount of fate points I received gave my system new motivation. My system's mouth became even more sarcastic now that it had recovered its energy. As for the subsequent quest, I didn't intend to do it for the time being. The rewards for this quest came so easily. Easy? Are you sure? Perhaps the scammers would come later. As for the penalty of fate points, I could just sneak over and trigger it. Do you think your system is an idiot? Alright then, I knew that I would most likely be scammed by my system. But at the very least, there was nothing wrong with thinking about it. I truly felt that this was a deep pit that I didn't want to jump into. However, based on my understanding of my system, there would always be a reason for me to jump into it. I had no choice but to jump into it. After tossing all these troubles to the back of my head, there was also something to be happy about. At the very least, my reputation was growing much faster than I had expected. I wouldn't need to activate my backup plan and risk being beaten up by Adam. I would need to drag the other beautiful mage Marguerite, who had a rather high reputation, down into a forbidden love triangle. Perhaps it would even be a four-sided love triangle. For some reason, I felt a sense of desolation in my heart. In this day and age, apart from me, was there anyone else who would voluntarily become a scumbag? Why was it so difficult to obtain some reputation? Alright then, let's not talk about such heart-wrenching matters. Let's think about something more pleasant. At the very least, our army had finished reorganizing. Although it was impossible to count on having a unified command, at the very least, everyone was quite interested in Omdoroken. Until we achieved our common goal, we wouldn't have to worry about us destroying ourselves due to internal conflict. In order to avoid the situation of Roland feels that he has an obvious advantage, so Roland directly owls out, Roland typing GG, surrender. What a pity! I did my best to increase our chances of victory. The first wave would always be sent out as cannon fodder. However, this time, the cannon fodder was of a rather high level. The mighty demon army became the first wave. Of course, if everything went smoothly, it might also become the last wave. As for why I had to send them out, it wasn't that I was personally displeased with them. It was that all the other species and factions were displeased with them. Just being on the same side as the demons made them feel uneasy, as if they were afraid of some earth-shattering scheme waiting for them. You're saying that you have a top-level demon warlock controlling these demons? Stop joking. Do you think this is my first day in the mortal plane? Such a large demon army is definitely beyond the control of any mortal plane's residents. How could it be possible without the intervention of a domain lord from the lower planes? Don't work so hard at the end just to let the demons take advantage of us. Before we figure out the truth of the matter, we refuse to listen to your orders. My reputation was truly terrible to such an extent. And so, for the sake of harmony and morale on my side, I unhesitatingly had René send out the entire demon army and have them act as the vanguard. Rain was also very straightforward, very directly agreed. As I stood on the back of a demon dragon and watched the demon army march with destruction, leaving behind scorched earth, I felt a mysterious sense of delight as if I were the evil boss behind the scenes. You've only just realized? From a lich to the commander of the undead army, to all sorts of schemes, to the point where even the gods are part of your schemes. You've always been a major demon antagonist. All right then, I regretted asking this. But suddenly, René smiled slyly like a little fox. Still, there's nothing bad about being an antagonist. At the very least, bad people will live longer than good people. If you really were as righteous as the main characters in those novels, the cruel world would have long since devoured you to the point where not even your bones would remain. As Rain said that, she even leaned over to my side and gently rubbed her shoulder against mine like a kitten. She used a rare honorific, as if she was using her own way of apologizing in a spoiled manner. Don't think that I'll forgive you so easily for using the power of chaos. Although I said that, I was unable to say anything harsh to her. Perhaps ever since I noticed how similar René was to Prince Roland from back in the day, I had already tacitly accepted her independence and the right to make her own decisions. When we returned to the mortal plane, arrange for me to have a chat with Cavendish. Hearing this, René's gloomy expression instantly brightened up as she smiled brightly. Okay. Just give me some sunlight and you'll be so happy. Remember, power is only a tool. Don't be controlled by power. Second brother Cavendish also said the same thing. All right then, since when did he become second brother? It would seem that I had underestimated this brat's suicidal instincts. Still, there were some things that I still needed to remind her. Never trust chaos. Chaos is unfathomable. Anything that can be predicted isn't chaos. That's why you need to learn how to control chaos, not be controlled by chaos. Second brother also said the same thing. All right then, since I wouldn't be able to gain an advantage with words, I decided to focus on A's past army. Not a single demon would be able to remain calm when faced with several dozen demon legions. The battle instantly became a cruel war of attrition from the very start. As expected, Immortal Orcan had a backup plan. As soon as the demons entered his territory, countless earth elementals drilled out from the depths of the ground, and violent earthquakes created countless ravines. As the demons fell into them, the terrain changed dramatically, and the demons who did not fall to their deaths had to face the encirclement of earth elemental creatures several times their number in the divided terrain. However, there were far too many demons. The winged demons began attacking from the sky, while the earth elemental creatures lacked warriors capable of flight. Soon, the battle began to tilt in favor of the demons. It can't be over so easily, right? That Omdorokan seems to be exaggerating. I merely chuckled. If the demons were so easy to deal with, we would have come looking for them the moment we arrived. That wouldn't have needed so much effort. Even a broken ship would have 2 or 2 nails. As the most ancient elemental god, even if he had fallen to such a state, he would definitely still have many life-saving trump cards. Could these demons really deal with him? I wasn't that optimistic. I only hoped that they would be able to force out a few trump cards. It would be even better if Omdorokan personally participated. But judging from the current situation, I wouldn't be able to see that. Suddenly, the entire area began to violently tremble and then shatter. This time, several dozen gigantic giant sandworms crawled out. These several 100-meter-long giant sandworms were low-intelligence creatures. They probably only knew how to eat and sleep. However, none of the natives here dared to look down on them. That was because they were large, ridiculously large. In their original form, the head of a giant sandworm was the size of a gnome harvester. However, their snake-like bodies were more than 100 meters long. It was even possible for them to grow to more than 300 meters long after they fully matured. Their bodies were as thick as steel. They were impervious to all weapons and had no sense of pain. Perhaps they wouldn't be able to swallow you whole, but they would definitely be able to drag you into the ground and strangle you to death. If you were unlucky enough to run into these creatures after they appeared, then even if you had already finished building your base, you would have to immediately relocate. These powerful low-level creatures were originally viewed as the natural calamities of the mortal plane. But now, it would seem that Omdorokan, the oldest resident of the mortal plane, had a way to control them. The demons that Renee had transformed into were all natives that had just recently been demonized. Although there were a large number of them, they lacked a high-level demon commander. The earth magic and natural talents that Renee had inherited weren't much of a threat to the giant sandworms to begin with. Their gigantic bodies also ignored the giant sandworms' physical attack. In a short period of time, the newly born demon army met with the most difficult enemy to deal with. Why don't we have the demons retreat? There's no need. It's impossible to bring them back to the mortal plane. Let's just let them be a little more useful. Renee's eyes were glowing with a dim yellow light. The power of chaos was now under her control. Slaves, for the sake of your master, offer your final loyalty. The chaos flame goblet in Renee's hand transformed into liquid droplets that fell into the air. The droplets transformed into a bewitching flash that dyed the dim yellow sky blood red. The demon army paused for a moment before quickly moving. They blindly pounced on the giant sandworms, and then, boom. The burning god's self-destruction was basically a must-have technique for all natives of the lower planes. This attack was a mixture of flesh, blood, and the essence of one's entire life. It was at least 3 times the maximum power of an individual. Not only that, these demons even knew how to self-destruct together to increase the power of the explosion. Even the powerful giant sandworms were unable to withstand this endless self-destruction. They rolled about in silent pain as green blood flowed all over the ground. It seemed that the giant sandworms discovered that the prey in front of them wasn't delicious at all. The injured giant sandworms dived underground one after another. It would seem that Omdorokan's restrictions on them weren't that strong. At this moment, the demon army was still quite numerous. They formed groups and charged towards the Earth Elemental God's territory. Suddenly, the aura of a sandstorm appeared behind us. The Inferno demon dragon hurriedly lowered its body and spun around, dodging that dragon breath. However, it almost threw us off. You actually dare to distort the noble will of my tribe. Invaders from another plane bear the fate of destruction. That was the angry roar of a gigantic dragon. The sky was now filled with grayish-yellow dragon wings. As Omdorokan's allies, the Salons had arrived. As for me, this was to be expected, which was why I smiled. Amelia, as expected of the Salons from Omdorokan's side. It's your turn. What? You're not going to do it if you don't agree? My great aunt, don't try to take advantage of the situation. Fine, I'll agree to everything. Chapter 219. The God of Law was fair, but from a certain standpoint, he was also strict. As the embodiment of justice, He would forever follow his own concept of law to fulfill his divine concept. He abandoned his own purity in exchange for it, which allowed him to grow faster than all other gods. Even if I left a backdoor for him, it would only affect him for a short period of time. However, some troublesome matters were unavoidable. For example, as a member of the Order God faction, he would instinctively despise those of Chaos. That was why Renée, who came into contact with Chaos, was destined to lose her status as a Law Knight. Renée, level 60 Law Knight, former, / level 20 Aurora Knight / level 14 Hell Black Knight. Total level, 94. Overall level, 97. Overall evaluation, middle level legend. I didn't know what Renée had done, nor did I want to know if she had used the power of demons or done something else that crossed the line, which caused her to lose her status as a Law Knight. But judging from how demons could obtain power through destruction and sacrifice, and Renée's ridiculously fast growth in level, she probably hadn't done anything good. Even if most elemental creatures were just wild beasts without any self-awareness, and even if they were destroyed, they would be able to reassemble their elements, that still wasn't a reason for her to go on a killing spree. Perhaps this was the reason why she had lost her job as a Law Knight. As for why I was still able to maintain my job as a Law Knight, it was probably because I was extremely skilled at exploiting loopholes in the law. In my eyes, this dimensional expedition was nothing more than a large-scale operation to hunt down a fugitive. That's right, fugitive Amdarokan, guilty of murder, war crimes, genocide, destruction of public property, a heinous criminal. His first operation had changed the terrain, and he had participated in this battle as an accomplice to the Beastman's war crimes. His second operation had destroyed Red Maple City's defensive line in anger, and countless warriors had died on the spot. The bloody battle that followed on that snowy night would probably be traced back to Amdarokan's blood feud. If it weren't for the fact that the Grey Elves and Shilua's expeditionary army had forced the Beastmen from the plains to retreat, it was likely that the entire battlefield would have become imbalanced. Perhaps the entire Northlands would have been lost, and the Beastmen would have taken over, leading to a new round of genocide. That was because I would have been unable to turn the tables in such a situation. A trump card like God's Descent would be impossible to use against mortals. I wasn't some righteous law enforcer, nor did I acknowledge that there was any so-called justice in this cruel world. However, I could still vividly remember the expressions of innocent civilians who died and the soldiers who protected their homes. If I didn't make Amdarokan pay the price, I probably wouldn't be able to sleep at night. Everyone, pay attention. Focus your attacks on the elemental throne. I don't believe that bastard can still be a coward. Seek justice for the innocent dead? I'm not that noble. I just don't like that guy. After that guy caused trouble, he went back to his hometown and thought that the matter was over. He went to sleep peacefully, thinking that nobody would be able to control him. However, I didn't intend to stop here. I might as well have that bastard go down as well to accompany those innocent civilians who died. At this moment, the battle had reached a stalemate. As expected of Amdarokan, he was the most ancient elemental god. All sorts of ancient alliances had summoned him, and countless cannon fodder had been forcefully sent onto the battlefield. Sand dragons, single pincer ogres, Kasola elemental knight, giant sandworms, titan descendants, earth dwarves, rock dwarves, mountain giants, obolos, and various other ancient species that had long since disappeared from history jumped onto the battlefield. It was as if a museum of earth elemental creatures had been created here. However, we aren't inferior to them either. In terms of numbers and strength, we aren't lacking either. Amelia's Death Garden, Marguerite's Rune Puppets, Rune Giants, and various Earth Elemental Lords' armies all appeared. Wasn't this just a competition of cannon fodder? Who was afraid of who? Elemental creatures from both sides fought against each other. Dragons roared in the sky, and tower giants and their symbiotes entered the battlefield together. The battlefield had long since become chaotic, and I could faintly sense that the enemy's elemental army was increasing in number. However, this was within my expectations from the very start. This was my home turf. If Omdorokan was still alone, I would have suspected that he was plotting something. Since he was constantly summoning reinforcements, it was obvious that he was in a difficult situation. And his next step, if he still hasn't appeared, it's obvious that he's stalling for time. Omdorokan isn't a coward who's afraid of death. In that case, he must have an ace up his sleeve that needs time. When I realized this, I didn't intend to wait any longer. Cade, it's your turn. We don't need to evacuate our allies? Even if we're putting on an act, we need to go all the way. There's no need. As long as the enemy isn't an idiot, it's basically impossible for them to release the forbidden spell. If they really don't even have the power to stop the forbidden spell, then we can just cut off the spell. Ha, that's easy for you to say. It's not like you're the one casting the spell. Although I was complaining, judging from the elemental tide behind me, which had suddenly increased by several times, the forbidden spell was already in preparation. Among all the major countries, the mage country had always had a good reputation. However, if there was anything unreasonable about them, it would be their overly stubborn pursuit of all kinds of magic. Forbidden spells were considered to be a large-scale AoE deterrent weapon. It was said that more than half of all forbidden spells that had ever appeared in the world were collected in the mage country's forbidden book library. This was doubtlessly a frightening deterrent in itself. But actually, having information and theories about forbidden spells didn't mean that one could use them. First of all, the requirements for a mage to cast a forbidden spell were incredibly high. Currently, only a single-digit number of forbidden spellcasters had ever been recorded. And most importantly, forbidden spells weren't easy to use. A mage's mana was limited. The reason why a forbidden spell could be so powerful was because of the natural laws of the world and the elemental source. This was often a complicated, and dangerous process. Basically, if a forbidden spell mage started casting a forbidden spell, they would be more than half crippled. Forbidden spells usually took a long time to cast. The shortest forbidden spell would take at least several hours to cast. During this time, the mage wouldn't be able to move, nor would they be able to stop casting. They would have to constantly chant incantations to guide the spell. If they were ambushed, they would either have to forcefully interrupt the spell and suffer a fatal magic backlash, or they would have to bite the bullet. No matter what they did, they would most likely die. And once a forbidden spell was started, the inconceivably powerful forbidden spell waves would be the equivalent of broadcasting to the entire battlefield, "I'm going to start a large-scale AoE attack. Kill me if you don't want to die." Anyone who wasn't an idiot would do everything in their power to stop the spell. The worst part was that forbidden spells would also consume the user's life force. Losing 10 years of lifespan was no joke. Some top-level forbidden spells would even require the user to sacrifice their life force and soul. The conclusion was that forbidden spells were useless. Without forbidden spells, most forbidden mages wouldn't be able to live for long. There were far more forbidden spell mages hidden in the shadows than in the open. Of course, this was only the limitation of mortals. For example, in the Ottoman Rain City, divine forbidden spells were far more stealthy and effective than mortal forbidden spells. But even so, Lady Storm and the water elemental goddess had paid a tremendous price for their forbidden spells. Forbidden spells that borrowed divine power also had an unknown flaw. Most of them lacked direct attack power. Even if they could kill the enemy, they would most likely use some sort of natural law to indirectly kill the enemy. I didn't believe that true gods would feel pity for mortals. This was probably another example of the gods not allowing them to directly interfere with the cycle of reincarnation. The era where forbidden spells could be casually tossed around on the ancient god and demon battlefields was long past. In modern warfare, even if there were forbidden spell mages, they would at most be used as a form of deterrence. Unless absolutely necessary, forbidden spell mages would never be used. After all, forbidden spell mages also wanted to live for a few more years. However, there were always exceptions to everything. In recent times, there was a mage who completely disobeyed the unwritten rules and casually tossed forbidden spells around like they were nothing more than cabbages, causing a series of troubles. Alright then, that was me, the former Lord of Yongya. The reason why I dared to do so was mainly because I had an endless undead army acting as a barrier. Even if a powerful individual managed to break through to me, my loyal, red hunting hounds would teach them the consequences of recklessly using forbidden spells. As for the magic backlash and damage to one's life force, I didn't care about that since I had the body of a lich. If there were any serious repercussions, wouldn't I have my system to deal with it? The current me didn't have the ability to cast forbidden spells, but Cade did. With Amelia and Marguerite, two top-level mages who were truth overseers, supporting him and borrowing the endless elemental power of the Earth Elemental Plane, the Earth Elemental Envoy Cade Eli was able to cast the forbidden spell Continental Sinking, incomplete. Yep, it was indeed incomplete. Cade's power level wasn't high enough to use the Continental Sinking, which was one of the top-ranked forbidden spells. The completed form of this forbidden spell would be to directly cut apart an entire area's landmass and its surroundings, either sinking it into the ocean or burying it underground. It was truly frightening. As for Cade's Continental Descent spell, incomplete, it'll probably be like an earthquake that everyone has to hide under a table, but not a single person will be hurt. Not to mention this subtle destructive power, this forbidden spell was indeed complete. And before Cade failed to cast it due to his lack of power, this was indeed a top-level forbidden spell. At this moment, countless rocks were floating in midair, and the number of floating islands suddenly increased by several thousand. The never-ending sandstorm in this plane had mysteriously lost its momentum. Only the increasingly frightening elemental tide was proof that this was the calm before the storm. Target: the elemental throne. The elemental throne was the equivalent of an elemental god's base in this plane. It was also the connection between the elemental god and the earth elemental plane, so it was definitely a critical point. Of course, under normal circumstances, even if an elemental god died, it would simply be the elemental throne changing owners. But if this top-level forbidden spell destroyed everything around it and cut off the connection between the elemental throne and the earth elemental plane, it was likely that the next elemental god would have to wait for a new elemental throne to be born, which would take at least 1,000 years. Indeed, we all knew that this forbidden spell was fake, so it was impossible for it to happen. But in Amdaroken's eyes, this was the enemy's vicious and merciless display. As long as he was still alive, he wouldn't possibly sit by and watch this happen. This was a vicious move that attacked the enemy's weakness, turning passivity into initiative. To put it bluntly, this was nothing more than a bait. And as expected, less than 2 minutes after the forbidden spell's power level rose, a white figure appeared on the battlefield. This white figure was currently rushing towards Cade at high speed. Finally, Amdaroken has appeared. The evil fish has bitten the bait, and it's time to reel in the net. Chapter 220. In Definder's royal palace, a 6-hour marathon negotiation was nearing its end. Then, the next negotiation is estimated to be 6 months from now. Please prepare a sample of minerals and a list of tax-free products before then. We'll strive to complete a comprehensive business alliance during the next negotiation. In order to show how much importance we attach to the next negotiation, Queen Gleena will personally come to sign the contract. I hope that you can give her the same treatment. Of course, I'll leave the job of advertising to you as well. After all, we share the same culture and race, so this is a great time to improve the relationship between our countries. We can't waste such a good opportunity to advertise. The same treatment? I understand. I'll tell Her Highness Renee, but at that time, it might be Her Highness Queen Renee. Haha, that's even better. It's getting late, so I'll be taking my leave first. After sending off the young envoy of Slewir Kingdom, Wendy, she looked out the window at the carriage that was moving further and further away. Elisa, who was full of energy just a moment ago, sighed. Her seemingly calm face also showed some worry. I haven't been able to contact them for so long. I hope that nothing bad has happened. No, since all communication with the entire mortal plane has been cut off, something must have happened. I can only hope that they can return safely. Relax, I watched those two mischievous little fellows grow up. They don't seem like short-lived people. Kelly smiled, her tone filled with pride. But, was it really all right to call Roland a little fellow? Perhaps we shouldn't be worried about them. We should be worried about that Graham guy. Don't be fooled by how calm Roland seemed when he left. Actually, the angrier he was, the calmer he appeared on the surface. He's definitely holding a grudge right now. According to my understanding of him, if he's in a bad mood, he'll think of ways to make others feel even worse. That's why we should be worried about him. From a certain standpoint, it was the wood elf before me who watched Prince Roland grow up. Her instincts were telling me that the situation was getting closer and closer to the truth. They have their own battles, and we have ours. We can't let them come back and look down on us. Work hard, little Eliza. The background of the voice was the busy administrative officials. They had only left for a short while, but the documents and letters waiting to be processed had already piled up into a mountain. Of course, I still need Big Sis Kelly's help. I still have a lot of things that I would like to learn from you. Eliza smiled and nodded her head. Kelly, who had assisted more than a dozen generations of the Mist royalty, was practically impeccable in terms of administrative capabilities. Her several hundred years of administrative experience was indeed astonishing, and she had benefited greatly from it. When Roland once again became a hands-off boss and Renée set off with him, all the administrative and military affairs of the Donglon Principality were thrown to Eliza and the others who stayed behind. The military affairs were still manageable. With the Red Hunting Hound's night around, the formation and training of the various divisions went smoothly. There was no need for any important changes in the overall plan. But on the other hand, the administrative affairs that concerned the people's livelihood were quite critical. These couldn't be delayed for even a single day. Although Donglon Principality didn't have to deal with the arduous task of post-war reconstruction like the Slewir Kingdom, just the large number of Greyblood elves that had migrated to Donglon Principality was enough to cause all the administrative officials to rack their brains. In order to increase living space, the construction of new cities and the renovation of old city districts were all at the top of the list. Apart from that, there were also the annual tasks of expanding Definder's city circle and planting new crops that were scheduled for the new year. The former would affect the living conditions of nearly 30% of the citizens, while the latter would affect the next year's food supply. These were both major tasks that couldn't be allowed to go wrong. And recently, an even more important task was placed on everyone's shoulders, causing the Donglon government, which was already stretched to the limit, to overload even more. In just one short week, the number of administrative officials who were sent to the hospital due to overwork had already exceeded 2-digit. The major task that gave everyone a headache, but that they had to deal with all their might, was the establishment of the Mist Alliance. This was doubtlessly a good thing. Not only that, just news of this would cause the entire country to celebrate. After all, raising the flag of the Mist Alliance would mean that the people of the Mist would be reunited. From a certain standpoint, the already destroyed Mist Kingdom would be rebuilt once again. However, these things happened too quickly. According to the usual practice, a trade negotiation would take several months to settle, and a military alliance would take at least 1 or 2 years to settle. The establishment of a common and comprehensive alliance was a huge matter. Economic, military, political, agricultural, diplomatic, and other aspects had to be unified and coordinated. In the end, they had to reach an outcome that all countries could accept. This was definitely not something that could be solved easily. 10 years? 20 years? Perhaps 10 years would be the most realistic scenario. However, Roland's final deadline was a short 2 years. As the core of the Mist Alliance, the Donlon Principality and the Slúir Kingdom had to complete all aspects of the alliance within 1 year. The heavy workload involved was more than enough to send several hundred administrative officials to the mental hospital. Actually, quite a few more had already been sent to the mental hospital due to working overtime. Kelly was the head female official as well as the princess' personal tutor. Although she didn't have a proper title, she was still the core of the newly born Donlon Principality. Even though she was a wood elf with excellent stamina, she was still quite tired from the heavy workload. Clap, clap, clap. Kelly lightly clapped her hands, attracting the attention of all the busy administrative officials. She then made a decision as she looked at everyone's tired expressions. It's almost dinner time. Everyone, rest early today and don't work overtime. We'll continue tomorrow. But we still haven't finished our work. The Shaywin people are coming tomorrow as well, and we haven't prepared a new contract yet. Also, the intelligence department's report still hasn't arrived yet. Work and rest is the only way to last. I don't want to see everyone at the mental hospital again. No matter what work you still have, do it tomorrow. This is an order. Are you going to stop listening to me now that Renee and Roland aren't here? In everyone's eyes, Kelly's current arrogant smile was rather scary. However, her seemingly unreasonable order was filled with concern that warmed everyone's hearts. Even if Renee and Roland are here, they probably won't be able to help at all. They'll only cause more trouble. Eliza's words caused everyone to chuckle. However, this was indeed the truth. If Renee was here, she would only be a rubber stamp, and people would need to be sent to look for her since she was skipping work. If Roland was here, it would probably be the same, but there would be no need to send anyone to look for him. That was because as long as Roland didn't go out himself, no one would be able to find him. They're only so similar when they're causing more trouble for others. When he comes back, he'll definitely make it up to us. While complaining, the two of them began taking over various tasks. Neither of them were ordinary people, and their bodies were in excellent condition. It seemed that they would be unable to escape working overtime at night. It was impossible for me to know what was happening in my homeland since I was far away in a foreign land. In fact, I didn't even have the time to think about it. After all, the powerful Earth Elemental God was always a tremendous pressure on my head. Previously, even though a major battle was imminent, I had spent my precious time preparing for war in the library. Of course, there was a reason for that. Knowing oneself and knowing one's enemy would ensure victory in every battle. If I didn't even know what trump cards Omdorokan had, I naturally wouldn't be able to prepare any countermeasures. If I had to rely on human lives to make up for it, wouldn't I lose the advantage of taking the initiative? As the most ancient elemental god, even if there were any records of him fighting, it was likely several thousand years ago. Although the two elemental gods on our side had provided some information, it was probably outdated. Not to mention, they hadn't actually managed to force Omdorokan into desperate straits, so it was only natural that they didn't know what else he was hiding. However, with the help of several top-level archmages and several hundred students, we looked through countless books and exchanged combat experiences from various factions. As long as it was related to earth magic, we summarized several hundred rules, common methods, and high-level extensions of the earth element's usage. In the end, we compiled a total of 30 books, filling up an entire bookshelf. Not only did it include a plan to deal with Omdorokan, it also included a general outline of how to use earth magic. It would be of great significance for earth magic cultivation and research. At the time, Cade was quite happy to say that with the results of this compilation, he wouldn't need to worry about research funding for the next 10 years, which made Amelia quite envious. There's an old saying in the magical world, How much power a mage can bring out depends on how long they've prepared. If they have enough time to prepare and have enough backup plans, it's even possible to slay a god. If you don't care about the consequences and come to me on your own, wouldn't that make you just like a warrior who thinks with your muscles? If it wasn't for the fact that Marguerite intentionally glanced at me out of the corner of her eye when she said this, which obviously implied something, I definitely wouldn't have agreed with her. Confirm the target, observe the opponent, gather information, and determine countermeasures. Mages were a job class that, apart from a very small minority of people, weren't skilled at melee combat. It was only natural that mages would never directly face off against an enemy. Previously, we had been forced into battle in many situations without sufficient preparation. But this time, we had more than enough time, and we had more than enough battle simulations and preparations. Otherwise, we wouldn't have come to attack the enemy's nest. As expected of a turtle hiding in its shell. TSK, TSK, TSK. Just like in the mortal plane, Amdaroken's basic form was still that of a stone giant. It was just that compared to Amdaroken's form in the mortal plane, the current Amdaroken made me feel helpless just by looking at his physical appearance. Unlike Amdaroken's pitch-black shell on the ground, Amdaroken's entire body seemed to be made out of precious white jade. It seemed exquisite to the point where even a casual touch would shatter it. However, the fact that Amdaroken's feet were able to cause the ground to sink with just a single step doubtlessly proved that Amdaroken's exquisite white jade armor was terrifyingly high quality. The forbidden spell's shockwaves continued as Amdaroken charged out like a madman. All obstacles in his way were viciously knocked away, and all spells and arrows were ignored by him. Just a preliminary calculation was enough to tell that Amdaroken was likely to be invulnerable. Still, this was to be expected. Since Amdaroken's path of charge was confirmed, it was time to activate the traps that had been prepared beforehand. Realm of Flowing Water. The water elemental god activated his divine domain after sufficient preparations were made to create his territory. A river suddenly descended from the sky, bringing with it a torrent of mud and sand that swept across the land. The mud and water combined into a mudslide. It seemed to be made of steel, but it was actually quite soft. This flowing mud and sand was far more difficult to deal with than a flood. Once someone got caught in it, they wouldn't be able to use their strength even if they had thousands of kilograms of strength. This was a trap created by nature. It had nothing to do with magic resistance. It was also a death trap created specifically for Amdaroken, who had unparalleled brute strength. Amdaroken got caught in the mudslide. At first, he did his best to struggle, but when he discovered that his feet had suddenly become muddy water, he gave up on resisting and allowed the mudslide to drag him along. Although Amdaroken was in a difficult situation, his eyes, which were filled with fighting spirit, seemed to be saying one thing. Even if you can trap me for a short period of time, so what? That was the elemental god's defense against his own physical body. Actually, that was indeed the case. Based on our deductions, the elemental god's well-tempered physical body's defense was basically unbreakable. It was quite a headache. The water elemental god's divine domain was limited, and the mudslide would soon lose its momentum. However, it was more than enough for us. Frigid winter ice river. The descent of ice instantly transformed the river into a river of ice. The frozen ice directly froze Amdaroken within. Right after that, the remaining demon army began to attack. In an instant, all those who wanted to save Amdaroken, as well as those who wanted to take advantage of the situation to kill a god, all rushed over. Amdaroken, die. The wind elemental god Camdarin angrily transformed into a storm giant. He intended to engage in melee combat with Amdaroken, reenacting the battle in the underground labyrinth. Roar. Before Camdarin even arrived, the frozen Amdaroken broke free from his bindings. What was even faster than his angry roar was Camdarin's gigantic white jade-like fist. Boom. There weren't any beautiful magical colors. This was only a full-powered attack, yet Camdron was instantly shattered. By the time Camdron reappeared not far away and reformed his physical body, he was already one size smaller. It was obvious that he was heavily injured. The wind elemental god had overestimated himself. In the mortal plane, he would still be able to exchange a few blows with Omdoroken, but in this world, he was weakened yet again. The earth elemental god was using his true physical body, and with the support of the dimensional laws, his power increased explosively. The difference in power between the two was now quite large. The wind elemental god, who was also a mage, had actually taken the initiative to engage in melee combat with Omdoroken, who was a pure warrior. This was another reason why he had been instantly killed. In the end, it was because the wind elemental god had underestimated Omdoroken. He had judged Omdoroken's power level based on his past experience, which was why he was at a huge disadvantage. But for me, none of this was important. From the very start, it was impossible for me to directly kill Omdoroken. However, it was enough for me to trap him. Beifong, it's your turn. Dig up his ancestral grave for me. Don't leave even a single tile behind. Right after I said that, Beifeng's reply made me feel quite uncomfortable. Relax. With me around, I guarantee that not a single mouse or cockroach will be left behind. I had been thinking about a certain question. Why did Beifeng's perfectly normal words make me feel uncomfortable all over? At this moment, outside the battlefield, the escaping giant sandworms had been stopped by someone. That smiling Draken hunter had already begun using his special ability to charm specific targets. Soon, the restless giant sandworms actually began to listen to Beifeng's commands. This was all because he told them that there was something that would allow them to obtain freedom and become even stronger. Our goal is, there's no tooth decay. Adam added fuel to the fire. No, it's the elemental throne. Dig it up. There won't be another earth elemental god for at least the next 2,000 years. We're going to make this bastard lose his foundation and become homeless. I angrily roared as I watched the battle unfold before me and drew my longsword. Chapter 221. The battlefield was in full swing, but a certain existence that was unwilling to be left out suddenly jumped out to make his presence known. Since we're going to dig a tunnel all the way to the elemental throne deep underground, then here's the question. Which one is better at learning how to dig? Come, my sister. Dig, 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 dig everywhere. How annoying. You've used this joke so many times already. Alright then, my system had become overly active ever since I revived. Since I was already annoyed with this joke, I might as well change to another one. Learn to cook, the new Xfong. Apart from not teaching how to use an excavator to cook, we have all sorts of subjects. In the end, you're still an excavator. Do you really like this joke so much? Learn IT, a good job. Learn from the Great Bluebird, the exclusive teaching of the new generation's electronic information mining technology. Isn't this just digging? Forget it, I'll just ignore you forever. Ignore. I decisively ended my ridicule of the mysterious voice system, and did my best to focus on the main topic at hand. Cough, everyone, be serious. We're at war right now. I think you're the only one who's not serious. Even though I said that, everyone around me was clearly dissatisfied. Even Marguerite had an expression of resentment as she controlled such a large-scale spell formation. She was currently having a hard time, and it was all thanks to her that the spell formation had been set up. Now, she still had to control the cannon fodder and set up traps, making it even more difficult for her to multitask. Indeed, it was quite inappropriate for me to laze around and chat in the middle of a fierce battle. But now, even if I wanted to do something, I probably wouldn't be able to do anything. Immortal Lorcan had fallen into a tight encirclement. There were too many people who wanted to settle accounts with him. The moment he was trapped, everyone on both sides of the battlefield rushed towards him. As long as I get rid of him, I'll become the next earth elemental god. This was a rather direct statement. Amdaroken, I can finally take revenge for my grandfather/father/older brother. This was a grudge between a country and a family, but wasn't it a little too much? Was Amdaroken really that bad? If he wanted to rebel, couldn't he find another reason? Gulp gulp. Alright, this fellow still didn't know how to speak the common language. The Earth Elemental Lords who were the most proactive were probably the various Earth Elemental Lords. Earlier, they had obviously been holding back their military strength, but now they sent out all their combat strength to attack their mortal enemies. And in order to immediately steal the enemy's divine soul and divine power, all the venerated Earth Elemental Lords personally went into battle. Under the sky, all sorts of flying gargoyles and wyverns fought against each other. Colossal creatures such as colossi and Earth Elemental warlords could be seen everywhere. Earth Elemental creatures were generally large and powerful, so this was a battle between giants. As they fought, the entire continent trembled, and the mountains trembled in fear. However, the Lord of the Earth never had the habit of running away. Boom! With another heavy punch, the flying tower giant slammed into a cliff in the distance, and a large piece of the cliff immediately collapsed. Apart from the Wind Elemental Lord, no one else had survived his punch. Amdaroken had used his combat achievements to display his astonishing power. At the very least, this old dog still had a mouth full of teeth. Even though he was heavily injured, Amdaroken was still quite strong. That punch he used to defeat Camderon had actually created a spatial crack, using pure physical power to break through the dimensional laws. From the moment I saw this scene, I unhesitatingly gave up on fighting him in melee combat. Using pure physical power to reach the dimensional laws, using brute force to break through the dimensional laws. Could this be the legendary shattering the void? If he wasn't injured, would he be able to shatter the heavens? Junior, take my space-shattering fist. Alright then, I won't comment on this strange name, nor will I analyze how much energy it would take to use brute force to break through space. However, this obviously unreasonable reality was right in front of me. Right now, Amdaroken was using his true body, and with the Earth Elemental Thrones buff, he had nearly limitless power. He was completely different from his incarnation in the mortal plane. If Phillips appeared in front of Amdaroken, he would probably die in 2 punches. But no matter how strong Amdaroken was, or how obvious the difference in power was, it was impossible for Camderon, who was also an elemental lord, to easily admit defeat in front of everyone. Camderon is so useless. He was beaten half to death by a single punch from Amdaroken, and then he ran away like a coward. If news of this spread, Camderon's position as the Wind Elemental Lord would come to an end. Not a single elemental lord under his command would be willing to obey such a leader. Taste the fury of the storm. Endless thunder was summoned and transformed into lightning arrows. The storm continuously lashed at Amdaroken's head, forcefully causing it to explode. It was obvious that Camderon had learned his lesson just now and gave up on the foolish idea of fighting the Earth Elemental Lord in close combat. He intended to use long-range magic to bombard his old opponent. Countless treacherous Earth Elemental creatures surrounded Amdaroken, while he comfortably summoned all sorts of lightning from afar. It was safe and eye-catching, and his reputation wouldn't be bad if he won. But it was obvious that he had underestimated his opponent. Amdaroken dodged and used an Iron Mountain Smash, which actually broke through the restrictions of space and landed on top of Camderon's head. Then, he used a series of beautiful consecutive skills: Mount Tai Crush, MT Hua Split, Shoulder Throw, Chest Throw, Neck Clamp, Eagle Jump, Waist Throw, Iron Bridge, Depth Bomb. I didn't expect Amdaroken to be in the wrestling league. You're still in the mood to explain? Hurry up and help. Once that guy breaks free, he'll be even more difficult to deal with. Damn it, he actually has the ability to teleport. Emily was in a terrible mood. She had heard that Amdaroken was an expert in melee combat, so she had intended to show off her skills since she was also an expert in melee combat. But looking at this super kung fu brat, she knew that she had no chance of winning. Relax, the larger an object is, the more energy it takes to teleport. If he could teleport as he pleased, he would have long since eliminated Cade, who was casting the spell. And since he's heavily injured, his stamina will obviously be low, and he won't be able to maintain his maximum output for long. What am I worried about? What does winning or losing have to do with me? I'm just curious about how he reached such a level of physical strength. After I defeat him, I want his muscle tissue as research material. At least give me an arm or a leg. If you don't agree, I'll go on strike right now. Alright then, as expected, I thought that Emily was worried about the battle situation. I was too weak. This was the true nature of a witch. Your inference was correct. He did indeed become weaker after teleporting. As expected, even though Camderon was beaten up to a pulp, he wasn't injured as much as the previous punch. He still wasn't defeated, and he was even able to occasionally counterattack. However, I couldn't just watch my ally get beaten up like this, which was why I started the next step of my plan ahead of time. Beifong, are you still not done? I heard someone's rough voice from the goblin's communication device. Dig, 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 which family is the strongest? Which family, which family, which family, which family is the strongest? Find Beifong for the Gentleman Alliance, and your dream of immigrating to Donglan can be replicated. Yep, you didn't hear wrongly. It's not 8888, nor is it 88888. As long as it's 998, you can learn Beifeng's secret method of manipulating and taming excavators. Do you guys like excavators so much? Is there no end to this joke? After my angry roar, the other side finally quieted down. Only the sound of digging could be heard. Your Highness, it's just that it's rather dark underground, so singing will help us feel more confident. After a long while, Beifeng's explanation finally came. I thought it was because you were having too much fun with those sandworms that you forgot about your mission. Did you guys invent some new method of playing? Are you having so much fun? Should I apologize for interrupting your pleasure? Hey, don't stay silent at a time like this. Did I guess correctly? Hey, say something. I'm so uneasy. Alright, as long as it was related to Beifong, there was no need to look into the details. Otherwise, this book would be censored sooner or later. However, the situation report came back very quickly. Amdaroken's nest was also protected by his divine power. The rock layer was incredibly hard, and the sandworms weren't digging smoothly. It would still take some time. But the only thing worth celebrating was that they didn't take the same path as the underground labyrinth. Instead, they dug from the ground to the surface, which allowed them to avoid many traps and obstacles. The only obstacle was the abnormally hard rock layer. Actually, this trick of luring the tiger away from the mountain had already been used before on the same person. But what was the point of using a trick? We know the approximate location of the elemental throne. It's about 300 meters below the ground. However, the closer you get to it, the denser the earth element becomes. It'll take quite some time to dig there. 300 meters? That's about the same as expected. How much longer do you need? It'll take about 2 hours. I helplessly shook my head as I glanced at Amdaroken, who was currently fighting a tiger empty-handed. If we really waited for 2 hours, all of our allies would probably have died. There's no time. Activate Plan B. Are we really going to activate Plan B? That Plan B is too dangerous. I'm absolutely certain. Hurry up and activate it. Must we? Can't we reconsider? It's too dangerous. We must. This is the best method right now. Not only that, this plan isn't dangerous at all. Time is incredibly precious at this critical moment. What's the point of making excuses? After a moment of silence, I thought that he had already begun carrying out my plan. However, I didn't expect him to speak in an embarrassed tone. Just what's Plan B? There were too many words earlier, so I didn't read it. Later, it was too dark underground, so I couldn't read it. I just turned on the lights, but I couldn't find it. I think I accidentally fed the plan to a certain cutie. I almost crushed my communication device right there and then. You said so much just to hide the fact that you forgot what Plan B is? You fed a cutie? Why don't you feed yourself as well? I thought you were worried about the consequences of Plan B, but I'm so weak. Just you wait, when you come out at #yen%. There had never been a person who easily angered me. No wonder the town security treated eating, sleeping, and beating up Beifong as part of their daily routine. This bastard really knew how to make people angry. Alright, no matter how angry I was, I couldn't possibly beat up Beifong through my communication device. Life still had to go on. Since he had forgotten what Plan B was, I might as well explain it to him. Move in an arc and give me a coordinate. I let out a long sigh after explaining the plan. When we reach the mortal plane, I'm going to lock this bastard up in a rare beast zoo as an exhibit. This bastard definitely meets the standard of a rare beast. Are you sure that it's a punishment and not a reward? Amelia's words caused me to fall silent. After a while, I came to a decision. Then send him to the Grey Elves to help rebuild. There are lots of beautiful elven women there, and many brats want to go there. But I feel that even if there are beautiful elven women around, there won't be a single rabbit to be found. That's the scariest punishment for that guy. Your Highness, please don't. I'll immediately carry out Plan B. I guarantee that I'll complete your requests with high quality and efficiency. Please don't send me to hell. If you really insist, I'd rather stay in this world. I still hadn't turned off my communication device when I heard Beifeng's begging. This man who didn't take the normal path was actually afraid of something. This job that countless young adults dreamed of was actually a nightmare in his eyes, and he was actually willing to stay in this hellish earth elemental plane. Didn't you say that this world is the real hell? Before I even finished speaking, I instantly recalled the time when I first met Beifong and his various strange-looking followers. They could basically hold an exhibition of the creatures of the earth elemental plane. After trying to guess what he intended to do, I didn't want to guess at all. Shut up and do your job properly. Otherwise, I'll send you to a paradise where only elven beauties are. Why does that sound so awkward? At this moment, a shadow had already covered the battlefield above our heads. A gigantic object was slowly moving. That's a bird, that's a gnome helicopter, that's a Superman, no, that's a gigantic duck. That's right, this was the core of our Plan B, the ultimate yellow duck. The moving fortress yellow duck was personally supervised by the great stone sculptor Ainslow. Countless tower giants were responsible for its construction, and it was incomparably gigantic. When looking up from the ground, it looked like a gigantic floating island. Although we hadn't yet had time to install any weapons on it, just its gigantic mass gave it unstoppable momentum. No matter what obstacles it faced, it would still reach its destination. In order to make it directly usable, we even stopped it in midair and waited for further orders. Boom. The appearance of this gigantic moving fortress changed the entire situation on the battlefield. Its ferocious appearance astonished all the witnesses. Even Omdoroken was astonished to see it. When he discovered where the duck had landed, he immediately teleported over to help. Just as expected, the moment the yellow duck landed, it stuck its feet into the ground, spread its wings, and suddenly opened its mouth wide to let out an angry roar. Woof! At that instant the entire battlefield paused. Or perhaps it should be said that nobody expected a duck to have such a unique roar. Amelia couldn't help but nod. What an astonishingly excellent design. Did you think I would say that? Roland, that's your bad taste again. Are you intending to embarrass yourself in multiple dimensions? Humph, foolish mortals will never understand the ingenuity of a genius's design. See, this is only the beginning. Its gigantic body's feet were now firmly planted into the ground. That was its fulcrum, and its spread wings represented its center of gravity. Its tilted upper body was the best form of balance. And then, it suddenly lowered its head with all its strength. Asterisk crack. Asterisk the ultimate yellow duck ate a mouthful of dirt, then spat out another mouthful of dirt, then ate another mouthful of dirt, then spat out another mouthful of dirt. Damn it, with such a huge commotion, it's more like an excavator than anything else. Why did I say still? Adam's comment doubtlessly explained what everyone else was thinking. Everyone nodded in agreement. Learn how to excavate, which one is stronger? At this moment, my system was unwilling to be left out. Ever since I came up with this plan B, it had never forgotten about this joke. That's enough. This is a yellow duck, the ultimate weapon, moving fortress, not an excavator. Chapter 222. What seemed like a ridiculous plan of mine was actually the cruelest way to kill me. For Omdoroken, this was a situation of life and death. The ripples of forbidden spells in front of me were becoming more and more intense. The gigantic yellow monster behind me was currently digging into its nest. It seemed that going forward or backward would only lead to death. And my allies were untrustworthy. No matter how strong a contract was, it would be unable to withstand the passage of time. Would he calmly die in battle because of a contract signed by his grandfather or ancestor? No one would be so foolish as to run away after fighting for a while. The sand dragons and stone giants also discovered that their opponents were difficult to deal with, so they started fighting peacefully. Most of them circled around the battlefield, and very few of them fought to the death. Omdoroken had been gone for far too long. Thousands of years had passed, and his most trusted subordinates had long since disappeared. If he had enough time, 300, no, 30 years, Omdoroken was absolutely confident that he would be able to re-establish his own faction and gather enough subordinates, but unfortunately, how can I give you time? Am I so foolish as to nurture a tiger that will only invite calamity? Of course, I knew what Omdoroken was thinking. From a certain standpoint, we were the same type of people. We were both narrow-minded people who wouldn't feel comfortable if we didn't take revenge. If we had an enemy, we wouldn't be able to sleep well until we eliminated them completely. I'll just say that you're narrow-minded and hold grudges. By the way, is it really okay to have such an unrighteous male lead? You're actually a myth-ranked hero? Are the historians blind? You're the antagonist. Shut up. I did my best to suppress my anger. Recently, my system's existence had been far too strong. It seemed that ever since it reactivated, it had been in high spirits and was always looking for opportunities to make me angry. If I continued to comment, I would fall into this damned system's trap. But from a certain standpoint, my system wasn't wrong. I was indeed narrow-minded. The fresh blood on the snowy ground from that day was still fresh in my mind, and the warrior's dying words were still fresh in my ears. How could I be at ease as long as Omdoroken didn't die? Checkmate. Both sides are aiming for your vitals, the elemental throne. I think you should focus on that side. Do you think your son Wukong capable of creating clones? Looking at the scene in front of me, I spat out a mouthful of blood. Unknowingly, I had really jinxed it. With a twist of its body, the huge stone giant split into 3 smaller stone giants that ran in 2 different directions. As it ran, the stone giant absorbed the earth element to grow stronger, then split again and evolved again. In a short 10 seconds, more than 30 Omdoroken had appeared. Impossible. How are we supposed to deal with so many earth elemental gods? Some people panicked. That's impossible. If every doppelganger was as strong as Omdoroken, he would have used it long ago. No, as long as each doppelganger has half of its strength, we won't be able to win. That must be a fantasy. Some of them were slightly calmer, but their trembling legs betrayed their lack of confidence. Humans are humans, demons are demons, and elemental creatures have elemental creatures' mothers. But I'd like to ask one more thing. Amdaroken, what's your mother's surname? Yet, I was speaking viciously. However, my seemingly useless nagging was actually the most painful part of elemental creatures. It was also my understanding of what was happening before me, as well as my disdain for Amdaroken. Apart from top-level elemental creatures that were capable of transforming into humanoid form, ordinary elemental creatures didn't even have a gender. Naturally, they didn't have a normal method of reproduction. Their method of reproduction was to rely on cloning and splitting like low-level creatures. That was why it was quite common for Earth elemental creatures to split off certain parts of their bodies to create clones. However, such simple clones wouldn't have any sense of self. They would be nothing more than puppets controlled by the Earth elemental. In order to create a new life and consciousness and complete reproduction, the Earth elemental creature would need to split its soul and split off half of its power to create a new physical body. Low-level elemental creatures would naturally be born in places with high elemental density. More than 90% of the elemental creatures in the elemental planes were low-level elemental creatures that relied on their instincts. They lacked intelligence and knowledge. Even if they instinctively split off, they would be able to quickly absorb the elemental energy from the outside world to replenish their bodies. Most of the time, they would naturally reproduce. However, high-level elemental creatures would be more troublesome. Every time an elemental creature naturally split off, it would be at its weakest. High-level elemental creatures also had their own instincts to reproduce. This would be quite difficult to control. If they couldn't suppress it at the right time and their enemies came looking for them, that was why old Earth elemental lords would do their best to suppress their instincts to split off unless absolutely necessary. If they couldn't suppress it and ended up splitting off a young body, it was highly likely that their enemies would ambush them and kill them. In order to prevent their enemies from discovering their weakened state, some shameless elemental lords would unhesitatingly devour their newly split heads. This way, not only would they be able to make up for their losses, but they would also greatly increase their overall strength. From a certain standpoint, every naturally intelligent high-level elemental creature's first enemy would likely be their own parents. Originally, only elemental creatures existed, so this type of living habit was quite normal. However, after coming into contact with the outside world, they gradually understood how the outside world viewed it. High-level elemental creatures viewed devouring their own children as an ugly behavior. Asking them who their parents were would be no different from asking them how they killed their own parents to survive. In the library, we looked through a large amount of information and all agreed that Amdaroken had the ability to create clones. Apart from being an elemental creature's instincts, there were even more records of Amdaroken appearing in different locations at the same time. I've seen at most 3 clones, and every single one of them is incredibly strong. And the strange part is that destroying any one of them doesn't cause any damage to Amdaroken's main body. It's as if they're completely unrelated to each other. This was Kamdarin's original words. Based on this, we made many guesses, such as that Amdaroken was actually a triplet, that he had several sons that formed a father and son team with him, that his natural talent ability allowed him to create clones, and so on. There were over 100 guesses. However, all of these guesses were shattered by reality. Every single Amdaroken had similar but slightly different energy waves from Amdaroken's main body. They also had their own independent mana source, so it was obvious that they weren't clones. It's as if they're his own children. These energy waves are basically his split-off body. There's only one explanation for this. He devoured his own split-off children and transformed them into his own clones. He's always carrying them on his body, intending to use them as consumables at a critical moment. How is this any different from a foolish ogre? No, even an ogre wouldn't eat their own species and their own children. The water elemental goddess Alos had a fatigued expression after she finished setting up the magical traps. However, her expression towards Omdoroken also contained a hint of disdain. Not every elemental creature was capable of being so completely devoid of humanity. As Stonevilla's wife, Alos had many descendants. Although most of them had already died, they had experienced the love life of a normal life. She was filled with disdain towards Omdoroken's actions. Even though she despised Omdoroken's actions, an even harsher reality was right in front of us. Our opponents were far stronger than we had expected. Due to the difference in age, these 30-some Omdoroken's power levels were vastly different. The strongest Omdoroken's elemental energy waves were only a third of Omdoroken's, while the weakest Omdoroken was probably only slightly stronger than Earth elemental lords. However, when it came to quality, with Omdoroken as the benchmark, the number of Omdoroken's elemental energy waves was already quite impressive, especially since all of them were clones of a martial arts master. Not only that, they also had bodies that were practically impenetrable. Although these Omdoroken's physical bodies were different, they were all controlled by the same will. They split into two groups and broke out of the encirclement. There were 17 or 18 Omdoroken on each side, and as they broke out of the encirclement, they actually displayed a well-practiced and well-coordinated combat teamwork. Some Omdoroken kicked, some Omdoroken punched, and some Omdoroken crashed into each other. Every Omdoroken had their own responsibilities and cooperated with each other, instantly breaking out of the encirclement. The 18 Arhuts? Or are they planning on filming a martial arts movie? Just what year is this old joke? There were people who wanted to stop the Earth elemental god from breaking out of the encirclement, but they always mysteriously died. Only we, who had a bird's-eye view of the entire situation, were able to see the black shadow that suddenly flashed behind the Earth elemental god's back. How shameless! Not only is he hiding among his own clones, he's even ambushing an opponent who's much weaker than him. Should I say that shameless people were undefeatable? That Arhut formation seemed quite powerful, but the worst part was that Omdoroken himself was hiding his own power level. He would appear to be about the same level as his own clones, but if he really happened to fight against his clones, he would suddenly explode forth with power to instantly kill his opponents, and then use his abnormal ability to sneak back into his clone. That's indeed quite powerful, but it's meaningless against us. Snap. With a snap of my fingers, the traps that had already been set up were activated, and several catapults were pushed out. However, the catapults that were thrown out were all green bucket. Boom. Boom. The buckets exploded one by one, and black oil splashed everywhere before being set on fire. This was the refined oil that I had obtained from the gnomes. The raging flames transformed into an angry volcano that devoured everything around it. The fire borrowed the power of the oil, and a boundless sea of flames devoured everything. But soon, with an angry roar, the flames were extinguished, and numerous pitch-black figures appeared in the flames. When I did a quick count, there was actually not a single one missing. This type of fire would be fatal to ordinary humans, but it would be a little troublesome for elemental lords. But for Immortalorken and his clones, this type of low-level physical fire could basically be ignored. The only result was that their body temperature would rise slightly and their faces would be covered in a layer of black smoke. However, I laughed. Ignoring them was already the best. Snap. Another snap of my fingers. How could it be possible that the water elemental god would only work on this trap once after working so hard for so long? A flood of water poured down on their heads, and a mudslide wiped them all out. This was indeed a completely boring trap, but sometimes it was fine as long as it was useful. This trap that was specially made to deal with creatures with brute strength was indeed quite effective. Ice. The ice trap activated again, directly freezing them in ice. Roar! Immortalorken roared furiously as he instantly broke through the ice barrier. This sort of attack had no effect on him at all, and it was basically just a shower for him. Instead, it made him exceptionally angry. In his mind, this sort of mischievous attack was a form of humiliation. Snap. Several hundred green buckets flew over to me as my answer, and the raging flames enveloped them once more. This time, the oil was no different from the previous one, and the result was the same as before. Soon, a group of stone giants with angry expressions appeared, but this time, it was slightly different. Crack. The sound of stone cracking wouldn't be much on the battlefield, but for me, who had long since been waiting for this, it was heavenly. Snap. The flood came again. Snap. The ice froze again. Snap. The sea of flames appeared once more. Crack. Crack. This time, the sound of cracking was abnormally obvious, and many of the stone giants' bodies were already covered in cracks. One of the youngest of Immortal Lorcan's children had already collapsed. He directly shattered into pieces and turned into white rubble, ending his long life as a puppet. Impossible! This sort of attack can't possibly break through our magic defense. Looking at the angry roars and shocked expressions of my old opponent, my mood became even better. Does this have anything to do with magic defense? It's just that the sudden change in temperature causes heat to expand and cold to contract. It's very easy for stones to become brittle and explode under repeated changes of heat and cold. This is a basic property of an object. If you have the ability, change this property as well. Snap. Although the other party had asked, I wasn't so stupid as to explain the battlefield to the enemy. Since this method was effective, I might as well silently make a fortune and continue. Another baptism of ice and sea of flames occurred, and this time, another 5 sons of Omdorokan collapsed. Snap. After this process, there weren't many left. Omdorokan had already given up on his disguise and was trying to break out of the encirclement at all costs. However, the Thunder Eagle formed from lightning blocked his path. A meat shield-like atom was meant to be used at a critical moment when he lost control. The furious Camderon also began tossing lightning bolts to suppress him. Snap. This time, another dozen or so sons of Omdorokan collapsed. Snap. After 3 more cycles, only Omdorokan himself was left standing. All of the clones he had accumulated over the past several tens of thousands of years had been destroyed, and his white jade-like body was now covered in cracks. The powerful Omdorokan seemed to have been forced to the brink, but his vicious eyes showed that he had no intention of giving up. Although it's nice to gather all the small monsters together for an early attack, it's far too ineffective against a boss. It seems that it won't be so easy to deal with him. Boom. Only the continuously digging yellow duck meant that time was on our side, forcing Omdorokan to go all out. No matter what trump cards he had to use them now. Come. I'll show you what it means to be a mage's slyness and shamelessness. Cough, that's wrong, it should be a mage's knowledge and wisdom. Seeing Marguerite and Amelia suddenly glaring at me angrily, I managed to correct myself in time. Since you've finally used modern knowledge to bully the natives, doing something that transmigrators should do, there's a reward? Is it a title or a point? Wonderful, you've finally started doing something that my system should be talking about. I believe that it won't be long before I level up, wield a god equipment, become a boss, marry a beautiful, rich, and beautiful woman, and reach the peak of my life. Just thinking about it makes me excited. Let me sing you a song. Actually, I've been preparing this song for many years. The Transmigrator's loudspeaker has begun to broadcast. We Transmigrators have power. This power is iron, this power is steel. Alright then, I was really too weak to have any expectations for my system. Shut up, your singing is even worse than Gria's. You insulted the system, deducting 100 fate points. This is the first time I've had my points deducted, and you actually have this function. Are you that displeased that I said your singing is bad? Chapter 223. Before this battle, we had a lot of discussions. A doppelganger created by splitting elements? When the cold and hot intersect, blasted away. Diamond petrification? This is indeed a possibility. The more I think about it, the more possible it seems. If it really happens, how should I deal with it? Diamond-type crystals are actually very easy to deal with. A more stable molecular structure also meant a greater fear of change. Temperature would change their structure and state. They were basically not resistant to high temperatures, so it would be enough to roast the entire battlefield. I'll get the gnomes to prepare some top-grade fuel. Is it possible to become gigantified? Don't novels always say that the final boss will suddenly become very big? Renee, stop reading those unreliable biographies and night stories. Although a large body can increase physical strength, its speed and reaction speed will definitely slow down. Suddenly becoming large on the battlefield is akin to turning itself into a huge target. Besides, if its body's energy level doesn't change, spending a large amount of energy to reconstruct and change its physical body is something that only an idiot would do. But just to be safe, let's install a self-destruct device on the yellow duck. I'll leave that to the gnomes as well. I think he might have the ability to teleport at high speed in the ground. There is indeed a variant of earth magic that is similar to the spatial gate. Alright, then prepare more goblin mines and have the earth elemental god inject large amounts of lead bromine and mercury sulfide into the ground. Is this useful? It's very useful. As long as you're infected with lead bromine, you won't be able to use any spatial abilities. As for mercury sulfide, it's also known as the poison of earth. A small gram is enough to disintegrate the earth element. If Omdorokan really intends to travel through the earth, what other abilities do they have? Let us think about it more. By the way, can we prepare an anti-gravity trap? We have a lot of earth magic mages. As long as we can reduce gravity to zero, I don't believe that he'll be able to withstand such a high mass. The warriors' pre-battle meeting lasted no more than 10 minutes. It was all about, let's go see that bastard. Where should we go to kill that bastard? Where should we go to celebrate after we kill him? Where should we go to celebrate? Bar or barbecue? They did not even consider what to do if they lost the fight. What, you're asking what to do if they lost? You dare to shake the morale of the army? Drag him out and behead him. Power and glory, blood and thunder. By the way, is this slogan really okay? I feel like it's another name for send. At least add some tactics and brain cells. But for a group of mages, the amount of time needed for a pre-battle meeting would be several times longer than the actual battle itself. It was quite common for mages to prepare for a battle for at least half a month. Endless meetings and discussions were boring, but the results were usually quite good. As long as the enemy had been identified and had sufficient time to prepare, they would repeatedly study the enemy's weaknesses and strengths and come up with several or even dozens of countermeasures. If they met the opponent at the place and time they expected, the outcome was basically decided. Right now, it was a classic battle of a mage bullying a musclehead. Ah, that guy actually dug into the ground. It's exploding, it's exploding. Look, it's coming out, it's coming out. Pfft, one side is green and the other is black. How miserable. He transformed. White jade turns into diamond. What a pity, why is it black diamond? Sure enough, every lucky guy who looks like a European commander will turn into an African commander in the next second. Those Uti deserve to die. I don't understand, there's no need to understand, it's a professional term. The anti-gravity trap has been activated. Wow, he actually flew up to the sky like a balloon. He's falling down, hurry up and tell the cannon fodder to hide. That guy is planning to teleport again. Fire all 200-dimensional anchors. Pfft, that guy actually only teleported his upper body. He's split up. Oh, he can actually put himself back together. He's as disgusting as a lizard. Renee broke out in a cold sweat as she looked at the group of mages who were taking pleasure in Roland's misfortune. For the first time, she wondered if she had chosen the wrong job class. Amdaroken, who was almost invincible in melee combat, was actually being toyed with like this. At this moment, she couldn't help but recall some classic rumors that had been circulating far and wide. In the eyes of a mage, there are only two jobs in the world: the mage's own peers and the cannon fodder ABCD. Never fight against a mage on the battlefield that he has prepared for a long time. Otherwise, you won't even know how you died. Pay special attention, and never attack the mage's own mage tower at home. With all his belongings and decades of preparation, he can easily unleash more than 10 times his original combat strength. As a pure warrior, the first reaction of seeing a mage enemy is to rush up and hack him to death. Hack him to death or be toyed with to death by him after he's recovered. Choose for yourself. A mage is his own son. Isn't that too unfair? I'm sorry, there's no such thing as balance in this world. Don't you think about it? The difficulty of leveling up for a mage is several times, or even several dozen times that of other job classes. Also, is the difficulty of leveling up by collecting knowledge and leveling up by throwing punches the same? Do you know how many mages are stuck at the silver rank? It's more than 99%. You want to defeat a high-level mage? Turn the battle into a surprise attack and encounter battle. You want to charge in directly? What's your name? Why do I need to know your name? At least let me think about what your epitaph should be written on it. The 108th idiot who charged to death? In fact, at that moment, Renee even wanted to ask Roland to change his job class. After all, Roland had once successfully trained across job classes. After hesitating for a moment, she finally remembered something else. In the past, she had indeed asked Heloise to teach her magic, but she could only helplessly give up. You want to learn magic from me? Okay, as long as you pass the test, I'll teach you. Let's start with the basics of calculus and derivative. If you don't understand, you'll understand after watching. Don't worry, it's not difficult. Roland is the one who invented it. He often uses it to train his logical thinking ability. We even intend to promote it in the entire magic world. So far, the response has been pretty good. As long as you can understand it, it proves that you have the talent for it. I'll teach you real magic. Back then, she listened to 2 classes full of hope. Then, her eyes were filled with numbers and symbols. The more she listened, the more dizzy she felt. Then, she fainted in class. She actually fainted in class. What a waste of my time. Using Roland's words, scum with less than 9 intelligence should just go and be cannon fodder. At that time, Heloise's comments made Renee quite displeased. But, if she wanted to learn magic, she had to start from those ridiculous numbers. So, Renee immediately felt that it was better to continue training with her sword. Besides, the power of chaos wouldn't be any weaker than that of a mage. On the contrary, the power of chaos, which was the source of the power, was even stronger. But right now, looking at Roland, Amelia, and the others who were excitedly discussing magic, Renee mysteriously felt a trace of displeasure. Then, her chest suddenly trembled as a tremendous power of chaos flowed through her bloodline. Yes, there's no need for me to be envious of them. I have my own path as well. Demons disdain using traps and detection. Aren't they invincible? Cavendish's teachings suddenly echoed in her ears. From the moment that the power of the elements was explained with logic, elemental magic had nothing to do with chaos. Controlling chaos doesn't require logic. Willpower is the key. You can treat power as your subjects. All you need to do is use the tyrant's willpower. Who cares what they think? Only what I observed was allowed to exist. I hoped that things would happen as I wished, so it really did happen. As for the principles and whatnot, that wasn't important from the very start. The more stubborn and resolute one's willpower is, the more suitable it is for controlling chaos. That's why Roland can't do it. He's too reasonable and needs to research everything. Meanwhile, you're just like me. You seem reasonable, but you're actually extremely self-centered. You're born to be a tyrant, born to control chaos. Renee clenched her fist. The firstborn of chaos had given her the right to control chaos. The endless void had given her endless power. Pitch-black turbidity leaked out from the dimensional crack. This was the most fundamental source of power in all dimensions. The power of chaos began to distort this world. Under the guidance of a mysterious willpower, Renee began to chant in a low voice. She gazed at the fallen children of Omdoroken. My pitiful children, I can sense your anger and helplessness. You've been deprived of your ability to survive even before you were born. Is there anything crueler in this world? You were swallowed up by your father the moment you arrived in this beautiful world. Is there anything more detestable than this world? I, Renee Chin Mist, the agent of chaos, shall give you one more chance. Become my slave in exchange for one more chance at revenge. Come, children, if you're unwilling to remain silent, then give me your souls filled with resentment and anger. Allow chaos to construct new bodies for you. Renee's hands landed on the ground. There was no light at all when she touched the ground. At that instant, certain natural laws had been distorted. All the semi-god mages looked at her in astonishment. They were incredibly sensitive to elemental fluctuations. How could they possibly miss such an obvious power of chaos? Renee didn't realize just how astonishing of a thing she had just done. Only now did she regain her senses. She rubbed the back of her head, not knowing what to do. What did I do? The power of chaos once again distorted the natural laws of life and death for elemental lifeforms. The elemental children, which should have been shattered and returned to the mortal plane, once again gathered together. Their incomplete bodies pieced together, and their souls filled with hatred combined with the power of chaos. Their long-lived souls finally came back to life, and the deformed, rebellious children of the earth finally stood up. Just from their appearances, they seemed like stone giants that had been randomly pieced together. Their entire bodies were covered in triangular snow-white crystals. Every single one of them had been pieced together by at least 2 or 3 children of Omdoroken. Deformed bodies with 6 arms and 8 legs were quite common. On their bodies, the numerous elemental eyes were all wide open. Their murky yellow eyes were filled with the deepest hatred, as if they had died with grievances. Renee's pure power of chaos was nothing more than a catalyst and glue. What caused these existences that shouldn't exist to return to the world was the hatred and anger these children had for the world and Omdoroken. I hate you. I hate my father. I hate everything in this world. I curse the world that gave birth to me. Just a single glance at them would cause the words of hatred to roar repeatedly in their minds. Mortals with weak wills would go insane. These 7 stone giants that had been pieced together were now living crystals of hatred. The entire continent was shaking. They were crying out in pain and anguish. Thunder boomed in the clouds as the furious elemental plane began to curse everything that was about to happen. Pitch-black clouds covered everything. The elemental plane couldn't bear to see what was about to happen. It couldn't bear to see its beloved children transform into existences cursed by the gods. Distorted divine power reactions. According to the Dimensional Encyclopedia, this is negative divine power. This type of power can only exist in one type of life form. Marguerite adjusted her eyeglasses. She had a rare expression of astonishment. She then hurriedly sent a signal to Adam, telling him to hurry up and retreat. If her guess was correct, the upcoming battle would be incredibly dangerous, far more dangerous than fighting against Omdoroken. Actually, she didn't even need to give any instructions. Adam's combat instincts had always been sharp. He immediately ran in front of the wind elemental god when he saw Camderon turn around and run away like a rabbit. Wonderful! I was actually able to meet such a miraculous thing. My notebook is on fire. Hurry up and write it down. Amelia's reaction was as helpless as ever. Wonderful. I have an inspiration. My new 7 virtues are about to be born. All right then, let's ignore this crazy witch who had revealed her true colors and was currently laughing maniacally. Amdaroken is still a god, and these children are divine children who weren't expected to be born. Under the influence of the power of chaos, their divine power has begun to transform negatively. All the conditions have been met. That's right, just like shadow, this is a new type of item cursed by the gods. Divine sins. Divine sins were a mistake. They were products of divine power that shouldn't exist and were unforeseen. As souls that died prematurely, divine sins continued to live on. They absorbed nourishment from their divine power and pure hatred towards their ancestors and all natural product. Uncontrollable divine sins were cursed by the gods with hatred, fear. That's right, they possessed power that even the gods' ancestors feared. In fact, they often countered the gods' power. When facing a true divine sin, it was absolutely necessary to treat it as a true evil god. Otherwise, death would be certain. Under the guidance of Amdaroken's self-inflicted sins and the will of chaos, these divine sins of elemental gods, which were named the unfilial children of the earth, arrived in this world. All of their gazes were locked onto their Father. Their eyes were filled with hatred, and their gaping mouths were filled with desire for delicious food. Divine sins are a mistake. It's an existence that shouldn't exist. As mages, if you haven't reached semi-god rank, you should retreat upon seeing them. If they see you, it'll be too late. Luckily, the chances of meeting them are basically 0. If you really meet them, then consider yourself unlucky. I finally understand why the Monster Encyclopedia said that. These things are far too dangerous. Unlike ordinary elemental creatures that received support from the Earth elemental plane, the unfilial children of the Earth obtained elemental power by mercilessly and forcefully stealing it. Around them, all other Earth elemental creatures began to naturally die. Tall tower giants instantly turned into rubble, while powerful sand dragons became dried lizards. It was unknown what other abilities they possessed, but just the side effects of their existence were more than enough to make them the natural enemy of all Earth elemental creatures. They were born due to their hatred towards Amdaroken, and they also possessed the power of Amdaroken. Without a doubt, they were the natural enemy of Amdaroken, the divine sins of the Earth. The moment they appeared on the battlefield, all the Earth elemental lords began to furiously flee. This was the fatal fear of frogs seeing a poisonous snake. In front of their natural enemy, they were nothing more than backup food. In the next moment, the 7 divine bastard brothers started a deadly fight with their father. Hey, Roland, even these things have appeared. How do you intend to deal with this? These things are even more dangerous than Amdaroken. Are you going to collectively flee back to the mortal plane after this battle? Don't be so noisy. I'm thinking about something important. Could it be that you have a way to control the divine sins? This is a new topic that no one has ever been able to accomplish before. Do you need me to request research funding from the Truth Overseers? No, who can control those things? I'm just giving them names. What do you think of the 7 golden gourd brothers? The one with the biggest 8 eyes is the first baby, the one with the brightest eyes is the second baby, the one that looks super hard is the third baby, the one that is roasted red is the fourth baby, the one with water stains on his body is the 5th baby, the one with the smallest and least presence is the 6th baby, and the one with a gourd-like stone on his back is the 7th baby. Hey, why are you all walking away? Aren't these names good? I won't insult you anymore. Do you think that these people from another world will understand your joke? This joke is too cold. This is a super old joke that reveals one's age. I'm not joking. I'm being serious. That's even sadder. No, it's even scarier. Your naming talent is as terrible as ever. Shut up. Someone who's tone deaf doesn't have the right to be a mic hog. Gourd brothers, 7 flowers on a vine. Not afraid of the wind and the rain, la 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 la. You're all so off topic. Are you intending on killing someone with OCD? Just kill me. Chapter 224. The Cycle of Karma and Retribution. Could it be that everything is predetermined? You reap what you sow? Roland, speak human language. No die. Fine, don't look at me like that. I'll be more direct. You won't die if you don't seek death. If you seek death, you'll definitely die. The scene before me caused countless exclamations. The undying Omdoroken was now facing his scariest opponent, the Brothers of the Gourd system. Are you sure this is their name? Fine then, since the unnamed divine sins had their eyes on their biological father, a fated battle naturally erupted. Or, perhaps I should say that they were completely crushed. If Omdoroken had been at his peak condition, perhaps this battle would have been even more likely. However, he had first been seriously injured in the mortal plane, and then he had experienced the 9 heavens of ice and fire in the earth elemental plane. The destruction of his clone had also brought him tremendous damage. Now it was quite difficult for him to even maintain his physical body from collapsing, not to mention dealing with the incredibly dangerous divine sins. Meanwhile, the 7 unfilial children of the earth had just revived. Their powerful hatred gave them endless motivation. Their natural ability to absorb the earth element made them the natural enemy of all earth elemental creatures. And since they were originally Omdoroken's clones, they also had Omdoroken's combat experience and techniques. Just now, the souls of the earth elemental creatures had begun fighting each other in the same body. Now that they met again in the real world, even the powerful Omdoroken had a flash of despair in his eyes when he discovered that his heavy punches that could shatter everything had actually become nourishment for the enemy. If you want my head, you'll have to pay with your life. But right after that, Omdoroken raised his head and roared angrily, exploding forth with the viciousness of a warrior. But no matter what he did, it was all meaningless. What happened next was destined to be a duel without any suspense. Or, perhaps it should be called a meal. Even his attacks were ineffective. Just touching his physical body would cause it to be stolen away. What else could he possibly do? In just a single exchange, Omdoroken was pressed to the ground, and then Armageddon arrived prematurely. The 7 abominations opened their bloody mouths and began to taste their ancestors' bones and flesh. They instinctively perfected the parts that they lacked. The stolen earth elemental constructs weakened Omdoroken, and he wailed as he watched his own doomsday. After Omdoroken devoured more than 30 of his descendants, it was now his descendants' turn to devour him. Divine abomination, unnamed. A divine abomination created by the earth elemental god Omdoroken. Currently evolving. Known abilities: Earth elemental absorption, negative divinity. System evaluation: if you can't find a way to deal with them, just run. I'm telling the truth. In the earth elemental plane, even a true god might not be a match for them. The system's evaluation was quite appropriate. Cade had even stopped chanting the forbidden spell behind his back. Even if he had to risk elemental backlash, he had to hurry up and lead his team away. I glanced at the former earth elemental god, who was currently being punished by fate. I hesitated for a moment before coming to a decision. Let's retreat first. Everyone, please wait a moment. But just as I made up my mind to retreat, Renee suddenly stood up with an embarrassed expression. Even she hadn't expected that things would end up like this. It's as if I can control them. What? Everyone's expressions were filled with astonishment. Controlling divine abominations? This was something that no one had ever heard of before. If divine abominations could be controlled, how could they give even true gods headaches? Seeing our expressions of astonishment, Renee was also panicking. Everything she had done just now had been in a daze. She was actually quite uncertain herself. Previously, when I connected with them, there was a line in the prayer. I, René Cheen Mist, agent of chaos, shall give you one last chance. Become my slave in exchange for a chance for revenge. They responded to my summons, which means that the contract should be established. I should be able to control them, probably. Can you control them now? Command them? Are you sure? Although the contract had already been established, divine abominations were far too dangerous. Even demons wouldn't dare to provoke them. They were truly untrustworthy. Even though I had shadow at the time, I didn't dare to use it. Apart from being afraid that the true gods would see me and kill me, I was also afraid of being devoured by them. I've done some research on divine abominations. They're basically impossible to communicate with. Are you sure that they understand what a master-servant contract is? If you walk over, they won't treat you as a snack. Closing her eyes and lowering her head, René entered a state of meditation. She was checking the contract connection between her and divine abominations in an attempt to control them. But soon, she opened her eyes with a face filled with fear. These life forms have no intelligence at all. They instinctively hate everything and want to tear apart everything in front of them. At most, I can only command them to destroy someone, but I can't control them to not destroy someone. Damn it, this was indeed the result. But it was already much better than I had expected. Can you order them to enter a deep sleep? From my experience controlling shadow, divine abominations all acted on instinct. They would be able to understand orders like eating, sleeping, and attacking. Let me try. René closed her eyes again, but this time she had a delighted expression. Not right now, but it should be possible once they're full. Everyone finally heaved a sigh of relief when they heard this. The fact that such a powerful Omdorokan had become food so easily gave us a tremendous amount of pressure. Retreat as usual. Hurry, hurry, hurry. We can't guarantee that they won't eat a moving target after they finish their main meal. René, as soon as they finish eating, immediately order them to enter an eternal sleep. Camderon, if the sleep is successful, hurry up and notify all the Earth Elemental Lords to stay away from this area. It's best to create an isolation zone so that they can enter an eternal sleep. Upon hearing this, René pouted. She seemed to be displeased with my arrangement. Can I take one of them with me to the mortal plane? They're all so powerful, so they should be quite helpful. Don't even think about it. There's only one possibility for a divine abomination to enter the mortal plane. True gods will descend to the mortal plane, surround you, and then crush you to death. Even if you successfully hide one, something will happen to a life form that only knows how to destroy. René instantly became depressed. Her expression was just like that of a child whose candy had been stolen from her. It's possible to borrow a portion of their power. I remember that Caro has partial spatial summoning techniques, but that'll take time to research. Let's not waste any more time and hurry up and retreat. René, you go first. The moment I said this, René nodded and turned around to leave. However, everyone else paused in surprise as they understood what I was implying. Roland, you're not intending to retreat with us? Amelia was rather hesitant. I still need to go to the elemental throne to collect some materials. You guys know, let's go together. That's Omdorokan's home, after all. It'll be safer there. There's no need. It's just collecting materials. It's a small matter. You guys go first. Your power waves are too obvious and will attract the attention of the Calabash brothers. Marguerite stepped forward as if she wanted to say something, but Adam stopped her and walked in front of Amelia, acting as the leader. All right, we'll go first. Come back as soon as possible. I nodded and stomped my foot. Pitch-black shadows surrounded me as I transformed into shadows and sped up. I couldn't hear the arguments behind me anymore. Why did you let him go? He obviously wasn't telling the truth. It's not like you don't know that he habitually rubs his nose whenever he lies. With his current power level, if he meets a difficult opponent, Marguerite had an expression of dissatisfaction as she questioned Adam. Of course I know that he wasn't telling the truth, but he wasn't lying either. It's true that he's collecting materials, but it's probably more important to settle scores with someone. Settle scores with who? Does he have any enemies here? It's Omdaroken. Didn't we come here for him? Adam had an astonished expression. It was as if he was wondering why Amelia would ask such an idiotic question. Meanwhile, Marguerite looked towards the center of the battlefield not far away. Over there, most of Omdaroken's flesh had been devoured, and he couldn't be more dead. You're saying that he didn't die? Of course. That guy isn't that easy to deal with. It's perfectly normal for a sly old fox like him to fake his death. Didn't we meet one back in the day? You were the one who personally exposed him. Marguerite was instantly rendered speechless. Wasn't Roland the sly old fox who had been exposed back in the day? Do you have any evidence? Intuition. As for evidence, I'm afraid we'll have to ask Roland. He's more suited to be a smart detective. Marguerite's icy expression thawed upon hearing this, but she still had an expression of displeasure. She had already guessed everything. These two brothers were up to something again. Amelia directly walked towards the elemental throne, but Adam blocked her path with a flash of lightning. Get out of my way. I'm going to help. Don't look like Roland doesn't care about anything. He actually cares a lot about the people of the mist. Amelia was rather confused upon hearing this. Did this have anything to do with the current situation? That's why the people of the mist have suffered great losses here. Omdaroken is the only mastermind who's still at large. How could Roland possibly take this lying down? Now, do you know why he went alone? One-on-one revenge? That's so stupid. Adam shrugged helplessly. I'm sorry. Sometimes men are just such stupid creatures. He probably won't be able to sleep at night if he can't personally kill the murderer and give the dead an explanation. Amelia instinctively bit down on her fingernails as anxiety appeared on her face. However, Marguerite suddenly comforted her. When have you ever seen Roland suffer a loss? He's so sly. How could he possibly die for nothing? Since this is a battle that Roland has long since prepared for, he should be the one to worry about. And right now, just as Adam had predicted, I followed the coordinates that Beifong had provided me. My angry roar echoed throughout the underground labyrinth. Omdaroken, if you dare to do something, you dare to admit it. Have you forgotten about the blood debt from back in Red Maple City? I'm here to pay you back. Remember to ask for interest. My angry roar echoed in the empty cave, but there was no response, as if there really was no one here. Coward! You don't even dare to come out when I'm alone? If you don't come out, I'll lure those divine sins here and watch how you die. It seemed that my threat was effective. That familiar voice finally spoke up behind me, but it was filled with bone-deep hatred. Damned Roland! It's all because of you that I lost everything. Today, either you die or I die. Chapter 225. This was the giant's palace. The gigantic purple gemstone door was large enough for a Titan giant to pass through. The ceiling was so high that it seemed like it was in the clouds, and several dragons could fly in the air. Even the tiles on the floor were made of rare white jade. The murals on both sides of the palace depicted countless mythical stories and legends. They depicted scenes of epic battles, where the enemies were incomparably powerful. There were ancient true gods, legend-ranked demons, and countless extinct creatures that couldn't be identified. The giant character who was stepping on Longtu was the master of this palace, the earth elemental god Omdaroken. The former earth elemental god had been one of the most powerful ancient gods. In the eyes of all the undying, this legendary name represented the endless years and the past, as well as many legends. Many generations of true gods had fallen and risen, yet the earth elemental god was still alive and had left his mark in history. This was the best evidence of his power. Countless years had passed, and Omdaroken had transformed his home into a glorious and holy palace. In the past, this place would be filled with loyal servants and worshippers who would travel thousands of kilometers to worship him. Amdaroken would sit on his throne and look down on all living beings. But now, this place was completely empty. The only visitor was standing in the middle of the plaza, but he was just like an ant in the palace. But he was still an unmistakably unwelcome guest, as well as the most dangerous challenger. Amdaroken, come out. I know you're hiding here. If you don't come out, I'm going to smash the elemental throne to smithereens. How did you know that I wasn't dead? A familiar voice echoed in the hall. The suppressed words were filled with anger and hatred. He had been forced to this corner from his glorious days in the clouds, and it was all because of the ants in front of him. How could he not be resentful and hateful? His angry questions were like thunder, but I directly ignored them. I didn't have any intentions of nagging and giving my opponent a chance to counterattack. Actually, I knew from the very start that he wouldn't die just like this. The title of the oldest and most powerful elemental god wasn't just for show. When our faction had an overwhelming advantage, and Amdaroken still hadn't shown himself, I could already guess what he would choose. Pretending not to notice and secretly making preparations? You want to win without a fight? You're asking me how I came to this conclusion? Because if I were in his shoes, I would do the same. When one's strength was at its lowest, when faced with an enemy with ill intentions, the chances of winning were less than 20%. Naturally, one had to find a way to avoid this battle. However, as an elemental god, this was his home ground. It would be impossible for him to escape without a fight. Even if he escaped, his opponent would definitely chase him to the end, and it was highly likely that he would be dug out from a corner after being heavily injured. And if he was destined to fight a battle that he would definitely lose, that would be even more foolish. We were both undying individuals who had experienced countless calamities. From a certain standpoint, we weren't exactly good people who would do anything honorable. Amdaroken's choice was about the same as mine. Faking death or running away. After all, he's the Earth Elemental God, and he'll face many restrictions if he leaves this plane. In that case, he can only fake his death. Tossing out a bait and having the bait die in his place. This would make one's enemy believe that one had died in order to obtain a chance at survival. This was a commonly used and effective method of saving one's life. And in order to make it so realistic that all the Earth Elemental Lords would believe that he had truly died, Amdaroken would have to pay a price. In fact, Amdaroken was even willing to sacrifice a large portion of his power. For him, it would be enough as long as he survived. As long as he survived, there would be hope for him to become stronger again, and there would be hope for him to take back everything that he had lost. What helped me confirm that Amdaroken's body was nothing more than a clone that contained a large portion of his power was the scene of him being devoured. As the Earth Elemental God, even if his elemental power was devoured, he would still be able to use the Earth Elemental Throne to replenish himself. However, I didn't see him forcefully regenerate the elements. He collapsed far too quickly, as if he was about to die. And since he had already made such a great sacrifice, it was likely that his Earth Elemental Throne would be destroyed next, and he would lose his status as an Earth Elemental God. This was within his bottom line, and he would definitely hide like a turtle to the end. Even if I lose everything, it's enough as long as I survive. Tomorrow, I'll repay you 10 times over for what I did today. I could already imagine how he would grit his teeth in the shadows. After all, I had done the same thing back in the day. However, I definitely didn't want him to achieve his goal. His stubbornness as an undying made him choose to cut his losses from the very start. If it had been anyone else, I might have praised him a little, but I only had one thing to say to that bastard. You want to survive? Dream on. Why didn't you ask those people you killed, those innocent people who died because of the war, if they wanted to continue living? I had many bad habits, but the most common ones were being petty and holding grudges. However, it seemed that I wouldn't be able to change them for the rest of my life, nor did I intend to change them. I spent more than 100 years to find all the masterminds behind the Mist Kingdom's destruction and kill them all. The Beastman tribe leaders who participated in this war were all dead, and I was currently taking revenge. As the only fugitive, I wouldn't be able to sleep well until Omdorokan died. The Earth Elemental God? Heh, no wonder they call you a coward. You don't even dare to come out when I'm alone. Are you that afraid of me? Ha, an Earth Elemental God is actually afraid of a rookie who just reached the gold rank? Wouldn't your reputation be ruined if word of this got out? Oh, sorry, I forgot that you don't have a reputation to begin with. Roland, you're courting death. His angry roar echoed in the empty temple, but I still had no way of finding out where he was hiding. All my detection magic had long since been rendered useless. It seemed that he was hiding quite deeply. After paying such a heavy price, it was almost impossible for Omdorokan to appear again. He would definitely be a coward until the very end. And once such an existence abandoned everything and hid himself, it would be incredibly difficult to find him. The reason why he had tried to test me was because he believed that he could definitely defeat me, and also because of the deep hatred between us, which made it impossible for him to calmly tolerate the enemy before him. And with all these factors in place, I would give Omdorokan hope that he could protect the Earth Elemental Throne and his divine seat. Then, I would personally destroy the Earth Elemental Throne. Only if he personally appeared would he be able to stop me. With all these factors in place, I refused to believe that Omdorokan would still be able to endure it. Come, as long as you kill me, you can take your revenge, and you'll be able to protect your divine seat. That's right, I was using myself as bait. Although I might end up catching a whale, only Omdorokan, who felt that he had a chance of victory, would appear if I came alone. Only then would I be able to personally take revenge. The moment that he spoke, this battle was destined to be a fight to the death. He wasn't revealing his true body yet, which was only because he was testing me to see if I had any ambushes. Fine, if you don't come out, I'll destroy the Earth Elemental Throne right now, and you can sleep forever. I walked forward as if I were taking a stroll, but the air in the temple suddenly pressed down, making it difficult to breathe. I suddenly laughed. A sneak attack? You've finally taken the bait. I viciously stabbed my pale justice holy sword into the ground, causing ice to instantly cover the entire surface. The sound of pain coming from underground was so pleasing to my ears. That brat had finally taken the bait. Brat, I've found him. Not only is he underground, he's everywhere. In a way, we're all in his stomach. Harlow's reminder surprised me quite a bit. Wasn't the person below actually Roland himself? But soon, a more detailed explanation reached my ears. He should have split up his concept of existence and put them into different murals. Only when they're all pieced together will he be a complete Earth Elemental Son. This is the equivalent of forcefully splitting up his own soul and power. Not only will his power level be greatly reduced, he'll also suffer pain as if his soul is being torn apart. It'll be worse than dying over and over again. This brat is truly vicious to himself. Only by being vicious to yourself can you be even more vicious to others. Be careful, you've hooked a vicious man-eating shark this time. At this moment, the realistic murals flashed through my mind. I finally understood how he had hidden himself so well. When my ambush was stopped underground, and when my gaze wandered over the murals, Omdorokan knew that he had been exposed. The next second, all the murals came to life. The giant protagonists all walked out of the murals and transformed into glowing phantoms. The next instant, all the phantoms merged together, and a familiar figure appeared in front of me. Omdorokan. This pitch-black stone giant was staring at me with hatred, just like what I had seen in Antune's underground labyrinth. As for me, I laughed out loud. Ha! Finally, I can take revenge. Beifong. Do it. Together with this angry roar, the entire ground trembled. Behind us, the sandworms under the command of the draconic hunter began enjoying their highest quality dinner. This was the symbol of royal authority that countless earth elemental creatures dreamed of, the earth elemental throne. The pitch-black stone giant looked at me in astonishment. He probably never expected that his heavily guarded treasure trove had already been dug out from underground. "Ha, why are you looking at me like that? Did you really think that I would leave the Earth Elemental throne for you? It's been my #1 strategic goal from the very start." Yes, I had come to the Earth Elemental plane to find Omdoroken for my personal grudge. Destroying the Earth Elemental throne was my #1 strategic goal. As long as I achieved this goal, I wouldn't have suffered any losses. The revival of the elemental gods brought about the arrival of the elemental tide. All the other planes were now even more closely connected to the mortal plane. Soon, a new war would descend with uninvited guests. Unlike in the game's history, the elemental gods were far too active this time. The elemental tide's growth rate had long since surpassed the game's history. If I didn't take any measures, the mortal plane would likely have a much shorter time to prepare for war. The undead calamity was the most obvious example. The Earth Elemental throne has given birth to an elemental god. If an elemental throne in an elemental plane is destroyed, that means that a new elemental god can't be born. The elemental tide is like water flowing downhill. The elemental planes will absorb the elements to create new elemental thrones. In that case, the elemental tide in the mortal plane should stop for a while. From a certain standpoint, every elemental god that was still active in the mortal plane was my enemy. That was why I had made Camderon take the blame for me. I didn't promise any of the elemental lords anything. I only hinted that only by getting rid of Omdoroken will it be possible for a new Earth Elemental god to be born. We can use this as bait to make the Elemental Lords work for us. I didn't lie at all. I only didn't mention when the Earth Elemental gods would be born. All of the unnecessary explanations were made up by Camderon himself. I didn't even show my face, so the Earth Elemental Lords could only take revenge on Camderon. That's right, I was setting him up. It would be best if the Earth Elemental Lords were so angry that they directly ganged up on Camderon and killed him. That would save so much trouble. At this time, all the seeds that had been planted had finally sprouted, and it was time for the trap to harvest its prey. The elemental throne was currently being eaten by mindless sandworms. Every bite felt as if they were biting onto Omdoroken's heart, and the divine power that was being lost was something that he had accumulated over countless years. He was weakening with every passing moment. The scene before me was a reenactment of that day in Antoon. Only, this time, I didn't even give him a chance to break through. I had set him up from start to finish. If he had still remained in the cave, even if he lost the elemental throne, nobody would be able to find him. But now, he had come out and the elemental throne was gone. It would be difficult for him to escape. The only way is to fight and die. At this moment, a trace of fear flashed in Omdoroken's eyes. He truly felt that his life was being threatened. The next moment, however, his eyes turned vicious. Some people would become cowardly and useless in the face of life and death, while others would explode with their final viciousness and fight head-on against their enemies. At the very least, they would die together with their enemies. It was obvious that Omdoroken, who had lived for tens of thousands of years, was the latter. Along with a loud roar of anger, the glorious holy temple collapsed. Omdoroken had already retracted all of his power. As the ground shook, he actually strengthened his body. Sharp spikes grew out of his black rock armor, and his eyes underneath the armor were filled with bone-deep hatred that surpassed insanity. "Brat, you've come. You've completely forced this evil wolf to the brink. Now it's time for the final bout of madness. There's absolutely no room for error." Heloise's warning was still in my ears, but I was already laughing out loud. "Ha! Isn't this exactly what I wanted? Come, Omdoroken. Hate me, hate me. Want to tear me apart? Actually, I'm the same. I've long since wanted to cut you into pieces. In that case, let us wholeheartedly fight. Here, you and I, let us fight until our bones are all shattered. That side's hatred is deeper, and that side wants to tear the other side apart even more. That side will be able to survive. The injured ferocious beast used its own roar and charge as an answer. As for me, I tossed away the pale white holy sword in my hand. The upcoming battle wasn't something that a myth-ranked weapon like it could participate in. Once Heloise returned, I would have an even better sword, a magic sword that could destroy everything. Awaken, in extreme, ice calamity. Chapter 226. The entire temple was collapsing. The height of the collapse caused the rubble to fall down like meteors, creating numerous craters in the temple. However, the two people who were currently fighting seemed to completely ignore the threat that was so close to them. With a flash of black light, that gigantic giant disappeared without a trace. The next instant I swung my sword. Asterisk clang. Asterisk amidst the rubble, my sword and my heavy fist clashed. Sparks flew everywhere as I was fiercely smashed into the ground. My sword-wielding right arm was in great pain, and my perlicue was bleeding. However, I had a delighted expression on my face. You were actually able to block my attack. That's right, being able to block Omdoroken's heavy fist was already beyond my expectations. This was a result that exceeded my expectations. If I block it, I might be able to win. Is that what you're thinking? A thunderous roar echoed throughout the temple. The cruel elemental god was venting his anger and mocking my delight. Then let me tell you, that attack just now was only 10% of my power. Do you despair now? Hearing this, I laughed even louder. Was he trying to test me? Even this was different. That sword attack of mine still hadn't revealed my trump card. Even though I was quite disappointed, I couldn't lose verbally. Who doesn't know how to talk? That attack just now was only 1% of my power. Are you trying to give me a massage? The power of ice, spreading through my sword, was gradually thawing. Everything was as I expected, but before I could stand up, that flurry of attacks came again. Asterisk few. Asterisk Omdoroken took a deep breath but didn't reply. His body trembled, and he suddenly stomped on the ground, vanishing without a trace in the next instant. His gigantic body displayed inconceivable agility. His flashing shadow actually surpassed my ability to see with the naked eye. In a blink of an eye, he appeared right in front of me. The only thing I could do was follow my combat instincts and swing my silver crystal sword. An unstoppable force came from my sword. The scenery in front of me rapidly changed, and I was instantly smashed into the ceiling that reached the clouds. Asterisk cough. Asterisk the impact on my back caused me to spit out large mouthfuls of blood. This attack had seriously injured my internal organs. It would seem that the difference in power between us was far too great. My physical strength, which was enough to rival giants, was nothing in front of him. No wonder the tower giants were only able to take one hit from him. My right arm was already frozen, but I didn't let go of the ice sword that was frozen in my hand. This time, when our swords clashed, I was still defeated, but I smiled. Gravity was pulling me downwards, but a pair of crystal-clear ice wings suddenly unfurled from my back. The preparations are okay. The opponent's guard should be down by now. Then, let him have a taste of the poison of this world. The young girl's voice seemed to remind me that I wasn't facing my mortal enemy alone, and the rocks that were hurled from below turned into a deadly rain. Dong dong dong. Huge holes appeared in the ceiling as I glided through the meteor shower. Dive, roll, and glide. Under Heloise's control, Omdoroken's pebbles had no chance of hitting me at all, which allowed me to focus on my next attack. Omdoroken. Accompanying this angry roar was the sword energy of my Ice Fury sword. This was an incredibly direct challenge. Seeing that I was gliding through the air, obviously intending to fight head-on, Omdoroken wasn't afraid at all. He was an expert in melee combat, so why would he be afraid of a surprise attack? However, some sort of instinct seemed to remind him that an ominous premonition was surrounding him, causing him to unconsciously look at the sword in my opponent's hand, the abnormally beautiful ice sword. This was a super long sword that was nearly 1.6 meters long. The sword's blade was made entirely out of ice crystals, and the hilt had the image of a pair of goddesses hugging each other. The sword's blade was made out of 2 intertwining ice blades. They were crystal clear, and it seemed as if stars were twinkling within them. Even though this sword was clearly so exquisite that it seemed like a rare work of art, Amdorokin instinctively felt fear when he looked at this sword. This was an emotion that he had long since abandoned. But right after, he stomped his foot and took a deep breath, causing that mysterious fear to vanish without a trace. A magic sword that can affect one's mind? So what? The combination of his well-tempered heart and body allowed this unconventional super warrior monks to ignore all negative emotions. In battle, he would always be able to use 100% of his combat strength. A magic sword that could only affect one's mind would be nothing more than scrap metal to him. This time, Amdorokin had no intentions of dodging. He intended to teach his opponent what true strength was. Immortalorkin's ice crystal wings descended, but Immortalorkin suddenly leapt into the air. Under the command of their battle instincts, the frost-covered long sword and the heavy fist still fiercely clashed against each other. Just like before, I flew into the air again. This time, the ceiling was just as firm as before, making me want to cry. However, I used my sleeve to wipe away the blood that I spat out as I looked at my opponent and smiled in delight. Amdorokin wasn't injured, but there was a flicker of blue on his right arm. Then, that blue suddenly started spreading. The gigantic black giant glanced at it and noticed that it was spreading, so he gritted his teeth and swung his left hand like a knife. Asterisk crack. Asterisk his entire right arm and right shoulder fell off and transformed into a block of ice that shattered on the ground. However, strangely enough, nothing happened at all. However, Amdorokin wasn't affected at all. Back in the immemorial generation, he had lost limbs more than once or twice against powerful enemies. All he had to do was absorb the earth element to regrow his limbs, so it wouldn't hurt at all. However, he was quite displeased that he had been tricked, which was why he glared at me angrily. "Idiot, you only know how to use useless tricks," before he even finished speaking, his angry glare transformed into astonishment and disbelief. What did you do? Why can't I regrow my limbs? Why? This is impossible." "What did I do? I didn't do anything at all. It's just that this ice sword of mine isn't so easy to deal with. This is my strongest sword." What did it mean to be strong? Was there such a thing as being the strongest in the world? Every existence would have such doubts as they grew up. Even if they relied on their strongest understanding, they would still walk down different paths. On the path of becoming stronger, the natural world's evolution and the cultivation of the strong were actually the same thing. If you believed that sturdy defense was the best, perhaps you would wear heavy armor or grow a sturdy shell. If you believed that being so fast that others couldn't see you was the best, perhaps you would become an agile assassin, or perhaps you would grow wings and be fast. True top-level existences were impossible to replicate. Their understanding of strength would condense into their own path. Only a sturdy physical body and the best physical techniques will be able to deliver the strongest punches. Immortalorkin was incredibly strong. He abandoned all those fancy and extravagant elemental magic and focused wholeheartedly on the mastery of physical power. He transformed all the elemental power into the physical constitution of his physical body, increasing his physical power, which was already at the peak of the world. Then, he learned the combat techniques of other weak life forms and used his most practical talent powers to evolve his physical combat ability to the extreme. To be honest, when I saw Immortalorkin's heavy fist shatter space, I knew that if we only fought hand to hand, no one would have the confidence to defeat immortal Orcan, even if he was currently covered in injuries, even if his power level wasn't even 10% of his peak. Sword Saint? Omdoroken's combat experience and techniques were far superior to any so-called human sword saint. His more than 10,000 years of combat experience allowed him to understand countless martial arts styles. Perhaps he lacked the creativity of humans and was unable to come up with anything new, and he had once lost to a certain genius in a competition of pure techniques, but if he had his unparalleled physical body, he would still be an undefeatable existence in actual combat. But no matter how strong he was, it was all meaningless to me. This wasn't because I was arrogant. It was because I had a different understanding of what it meant to be strong. So-called strong is nothing more than an unbreakable sword, irresistible attack, an unbreakable shield, irresistible defense, and a strange attack method that's difficult to dodge, incredibly difficult to defend against. Perhaps it was because I was a transmigrator, but my understanding was completely different from the mainstream view of this world. That was why I never rejected other small ideas. As long as they could be of help to me, I would try to learn them and incorporate them into my own system. If Omdoroken was the representative of single-mindedness and walked the path of strengthening one's advantage, then perhaps my path was the representative of multi-mindedness. Perhaps I'm no match for Omdoroken in certain areas, but I'm able to find the perfect combination of power to counter Omdoroken's power and use my own strengths to attack Omdoroken's weaknesses. Is Omdoroken really strong? Indeed, but his attack method is obviously too simple. In that case, a shield to counter and defend against Omdoroken's advantages, and a sword to cut through Omdoroken's sturdy defense would be more than enough. I don't need to suppress Omdoroken's strength. I only need to defeat Omdoroken. So-called strong is just enough power to defeat Omdoroken. And right now, I just happen to have a magic sword that could easily cut through Omdoroken's defenses. Ice Calamity. This was an incredibly dangerous magic sword. In fact, it was so dangerous that I didn't even dare to use it in the mortal plane. The reason? Just like the 7 Calabash brothers, Ice Calamity's power originated from Shadow, an incredibly dangerous divine sin. I didn't want to enjoy being surrounded and attacked by all the gods. But after Ice Calamity combined with Heloise, who had the ability to transform into a blade, I finally grasped this incredibly frightening double-edged sword. Ice Calamity's cold flames of despair also became my power. Come, Omdoroken. What will appear when it's cold to the extreme? My crystalline ice sword sliced through the dazzling light of the Milky Way. The arc-shaped sword light actually slashed out with blue flames. This wasn't any kind of mixed magic. It was simply the gathering of pure cold. This was the divine sin of ice's ability that even the gods feared. When things reached an extreme, they would move in the opposite direction. When it was cold to the extreme cold would actually condense into the form of flames. But just looking at the slowly burning ice flames made Omdoroken feel like he couldn't breathe. It was as if the ice flames were still spreading on his arm and the Grim Reaper was circling around his neck. If I hadn't cut off my arm just now, my entire body would have likely been frozen over for all eternity. This was a divine sin's curse on the world. Shadow's natural talent ability was to bring all objects into his body's extreme low temperature, absolute zero. At such an extreme temperature, matter wouldn't appear as liquid, solid, or gaseous. Instead, it would appear as a single superatom. This superatom would appear as a single entity. It would stop, and freeze. It would simply exist. At absolute zero, all energy would vanish, and all consciousness would enter hibernation. Only its existence itself would appear as if time itself had frozen. Of course, Omdoroken's arm wouldn't be able to regenerate. His arm would still exist in concept, just that it would be frozen. Just like how it was impossible for a human to have 3 arms, he would never be able to regenerate his arm unless he destroyed it. This was a poison of the world capable of freezing everything. It was a poison of time capable of stopping the most basic dimensional laws of the world, time itself. This was also why I was so afraid of Shadow. If Shadow directly spat out a mouthful of ice flames at me, I would probably be able to sleep until the end of the world. It was impossible for me to be immune to this ice flame. I was able to use it because I had an even sturdier shield that was more than enough to resist the world's poison. Since even time could be frozen, how could there possibly be an existence in this world that could defend against them? Yes, this world didn't have such an existence, but that didn't mean that there wouldn't be one in the new world. Phew, this really is the coldest ice. My hands are so cold that I can't feel them anymore. Damn it, damn it. Even though I was in the scorching hot earth elemental plane, I was still screaming out loud as if it was winter. My new world's coldest ice had already frozen over my arms. Although it was said to be the coldest, it actually wasn't much different from the ice in this world. And since I defined it as the coldest ice in the world, then even the Divine Sin's freezing flames wouldn't be able to lower the temperature of this ice. In that case, my hands would be safe. Of course, there was no way to prevent frostbite afterwards. This was the Creator Goddess' special ability, the indestructible armor that I had prepared for myself. Was I wrong? It should be indestructible, not indestructible? Heh, you'll soon find out. The calamitous ice sword suddenly stabbed into the ground, causing the familiar frozen earth to appear around me once again. Amdaroken, welcome to my world, frigid winter earth. You actually dare to challenge the Creator Goddess' special ability? You maniac! His angry words came to a sudden stop. The ice suddenly covered me and transformed into a heavy armor of ice. Meanwhile, the dangerous ice sword's blue flames suddenly burned fiercely, turning me into a flaming man. This is a nightmarish opponent. You actually dare to wear such a thing on your body? The power of a divine sin, the Creator Goddess' special ability. You're an even crazier heretic than I am. You're opposing all the true gods. You're challenging the most basic order and natural laws of this world. My evaluation of my opponent kept rising, but seeing this scene, I knew that I had still underestimated my opponent. My opponent was completely unreasonable. For the first time ever, Amdaroken lost confidence in defeating my opponent. From a mere human that I looked down on to an opponent that could threaten me, from a maniac who was challenging the Creator Goddess' special ability, I was probably completely insane. For the first time ever, Amdaroken saw his own future. For the first time ever, he regretted making such a troublesome and dangerous mortal enemy for the sake of a few mortals. How could I possibly miss that trace of regret and fear as I was protected by my ice armor? And so, I smiled in satisfaction. Ice had already covered this entire area. After a long preparation period, my winter lands had already descended upon this area. The next instant, I dragged Amdaroken into this ice plane as well. This time, he was unable to escape. Asterisk ding ding ding. Asterisk with a series of crisp sounds, countless pieces of ice condensed into gigantic ice swords. The entire plane was now covered in swords. Next, I stabbed my calamity swords into the swords, and every single ice sword's blade was covered in lethal blue flames. I casually picked up one of the swords, and the ice flames on it burned like a torch. I smiled in satisfaction. This time, it was my turn to charge at Amdaroken. Amdaroken, the time for you to repent is over. Then, let us begin the second round where you fight to the death. I said before that it's time to settle everything. High and mighty gods? Have a taste of the vengeance of mortals that you all view as ants.